Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Juan Carlos Garcia. Abril Pérez was born on November 18, 1971 in Monteray, Mexico. She is the second of 3 children. Her parents, Maria and Manuel, did their best to provide their children with a good education and aspirations for a better life. Together with her brother Javier and sister Ana, Abril's family lived a simple but hopeful life. Abril, Ana, and Javier all excelled in school, participating in musical activities, sports, and developing their talents. However, Abril showed early on a special ability in mathematics and business skills. She was an avid reader and was always the best student in her class. As a teenager, Abril started working to become financially independent, saving and always having savings from her school days. She was very disciplined, able to plan and manage her time effectively. Her goal was to get a quality college education to secure a well-paying job with plenty of career advancement opportunities. After graduating from high school, Abril was accepted into the most prestigious university in Nuevo León, where she earned a master's degree in finance and business administration. Her classmates described her as smart, focused, and ambitious, but also fun-loving, kind, and always ready to help others. After graduating, Abril was hired into the sales department of one of the largest and fastest-growing companies in the country. A few years later, she tried her hand at digital sales, a new and rapidly growing field, and realized it was the right fit for her. She quickly rose through the ranks, becoming the company's CEO within 2 years. Abril was young, beautiful, successful, ambitious, and on her way to the life she had always dreamed of. She built a brilliant career, provided for her family, and had many plans for the future. However, her personal life remained unstable, disappointing her loved ones. Abril believed that she would find true love and live a long, happy life. In the mid-1990s, when Abril's career was going strong, she met a young man named Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez. A little over 3 years older than Abril, he had similar career ambitions to hers, which impressed her. In turn, he was attracted to her beauty, charm, kindness, radiant smile, along with her sharp intellect and strong determination. Juan Carlos graduated from a prestigious University of Science and Technology, where he excelled in the fields of economics and commerce. He then went on to study at Harvard University in the United States before returning to Mexico and building a successful career in the rapidly growing e-commerce sector. After meeting at a conference focused on the latest financial technologies, Abril and Juan Carlos met several more times as their companies worked on joint projects. Eventually, Juan Carlos realized that he had fallen in love with this intelligent and beautiful woman. Juan got Abril's phone number through mutual acquaintances, called Abril, and asked her out. Initially, they were both attracted to each other. Abril found Juan intelligent and energetic, able to chat about any topic. The relationship between the two developed rapidly, and by 1998, they decided to get married. At that time, both had achieved considerable success in their careers and were involved in developing online stores, a promising direction. Their life was like a real fairy tale, attracting the envy and admiration of those around them. After 3 years of marriage, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Ana Cecilia, in 2001. At that time, Abril was 30 years old and she was extremely happy because the birth of the child marked a new chapter in their lives. Her husband also seemed happy and loved their newborn daughter. 2 years later, Abril gave birth to a son named Juan Carlos Jr. And 2 years later, the family welcomed a third child, a boy named Julio Andreas. Abril is a hardworking, active young mother who hardly takes any maternity leave. She still maintains a balance between her motherly responsibilities and her thriving career. Every day, Abril cooks delicious meals, helps her children with their homework, takes them to sports and tries to be a good friend to them. Their family appears to be perfect. They are wealthy, successful, and have 3 well-behaved children. However, appearances do not always reflect reality. The problems within their family were not known for a long time, even to those closest to them. In fact, Juan showed his true colors in the early years of their marriage. He was hot-tempered, aggressive, and very demanding. He did not like to compromise and wanted everything exactly his way. At first, Abril thought that over time, his personality would soften. However, Juan Carlos's true personality was still there. But they still had joint projects, and their teamwork brought impressive results. However, over time, he became more angry, and the verbal arguments gradually escalated into physical violence. After the birth of their first daughter, Juan had a period of calm, trying to restrain his emotions. But this restraint did not last. Unfortunately, after the birth of his eldest son and continuing after the birth of his third child, he no longer tried to be a good father or husband. Juan Carlos often vented his anger and negative emotions on his wife, not keeping any negative emotions to himself. He insulted and belittled his wife, who was the mother of their children, and it seemed that she had to endure this suffering. He often physically abused his wife, but in order not to leave any marks on her body, he forced her to hide her injuries with clothes or makeup. All these actions were done to protect his perfect reputation and pride in being considered a good man. Abril kept silent for many years, trying not to tell her sister and mother about her terrible life. She could support herself with a well-paid job and could raise her children, giving them a good and stable life, but her husband was a rich and influential man. He could use his power and money to gain custody of the children through the courts, forcing her to stay silent and endure this abuse for a long time. Knowing the true nature of Juan Carlos, Pérez could not accept that her daughter and son were left alone with someone who could do anything without control. The family situation reached a dead end by the beginning of 2010. Those who had thought this was an ideal family began to suspect that something serious was going on inside. Abril became desperate, terribly thin, suffered from insomnia, and often had bruises on his face and body that became difficult to hide and impossible to explain. Juan Carlos remained calm and confident, pretending that everything was fine in public. He continued to portray the role of a loving and caring husband, polite and affectionate to his wife, but the reality was completely different when he was at home. He became a cruel person, making it dangerous to be around him. Although Abril's loved ones asked for a divorce, Abril insisted that everything was fine and that she would resolve the issue with her husband herself. 2014 marked the peak of Sanchez's career when he became the director of a large trading company and one of the most influential people in the field. After his promotion, his family moved to Mexico City and settled in a large house in one of the capital's most beautiful neighborhoods. Their children attended a prestigious private school. Abril hoped that the move and the complete change of scenery would improve their relationship. However, the opposite happened. Juan continued to hurt and insult his wife, even in front of their children. He began to accuse her of infidelity without any basis. Whenever she tried to defend herself, he resorted to violence, claiming to find evidence of her infidelity. He monitored her phone and emails, and banned her from using social media. After that, finding no evidence, he even hired a private investigator to follow Abril and take pictures of any man who came near her. Over the next 4 years, Abril tried everything to save her marriage, although her husband's behavior became completely unbearable. She lived in a never-ending nightmare. On the surface it seemed like a happy and successful marriage. Many people were even jealous of Abril because she had a famous, influential, wealthy and, as many thought, caring husband. In 2018, the Sanchez family visited the Pérez family in Monteray to celebrate Christmas. However, Juan Carlos continued to treat his wife roughly, even in front of her parents. The incident left them extremely shocked and appalled. After witnessing this, Abril realized that she could not continue living like this and decided to divorce. She informed Juan of her intention, but he reacted with rage, choking her to the point that she almost fainted. The incident only stopped and Abril's mother entered the room and intervened. Upon returning to Mexico City, Abril decided to divorce and moved to another bedroom in the house. However, this did not protect her from her husband's violence. On the morning of January 4th, her husband entered the bedroom and attacked her with a baseball bat. Abril was lucky to escape death by slipping out of bed. She screamed, and their children ran into the room. The youngest son protected his mother while the eldest son took the baseball bat from his father. Together, they ran out of the house and to the hospital where Abril received the medical attention she needed. Doctors diagnosed Abril with a severe concussion and a deep wound above her eyebrow, which required stitches. Shortly after Abril and the children left the house, Juan Carlos contacted a lawyer and posted on social media about the conflict between him and his wife, claiming that his wife had betrayed him. Juan Carlos also claimed that his wife had taken all the money from the safe and that when he tried to stop her, she had stabbed him with a knife. As evidence, he posted a photo of a bloody knife and blood stains on the floor. However, the blood on the floor was actually Abril's, from her own room. The photo of the knife was also taken from the internet. Despite this, Juan Carlos' friends believed his story and reshared it on social media, drawing attention to the incident. While still in the hospital, Abril sued her husband for intentional injury. After being discharged from the hospital, she left the house and moved in with her sons. According to the temporary decision, she was granted sole custody of the children. Their eldest daughter, now of age and in college, sided with her mother and denounced her father's cruelty. Juan was ordered to pay alimony to his ex-wife and sons while they lived with their mother. The amount of alimony was relatively small, about $300. However, Sanchez refused to pay and faced jail time. However, given his status as an influential businessman, he believed he would not face any punishment. After experiencing the nightmare, Abril decided to return to her hometown of Monteray, to her parents' house, taking her children with her. There, she filed for divorce and monitored the situation. At the same time, she began providing online support and counseling to women in similar situations. She also planned to open a center for psychological and legal support for victims of domestic violence. However, the judicial system was disappointing. It was not until September 2019, 8.5 months after the incident, that Sanchez was arrested for causing bodily harm and attempting to kill his wife. He was sent to prison, but after just over a month, he successfully appealed and was released in November of that year. The case was presided over by Judge Federico M., who surprisingly reclassified the case, leading to a new trial. During the trial, Abril's hospital photos and entries from her medical records were not presented. At the same time, the testimony of the woman and her sons was not considered sufficient grounds to detain Juan Carlos. Furthermore, Juan insisted that his ex-wife was turning the children against him. Juan was released immediately from the courtroom because Judge M considered that his actions did not pose a direct threat to the victim's life. According to the judge, if Juan had really intended to end his wife's life, he would have done so, especially since she was asleep during the attack and could not resist. Abril was shocked and frightened when she learned that her ex-husband had been released. She immediately realized that Juan had all the connections and had paid off his way out of jail, putting her and her daughter's lives at risk. She wrote a formal letter to the judge expressing her fear and concern for her life, but it did not seem to have any positive impact. After being released, Juan Carlos initiated a lawsuit for custody of the children. He demanded that she return to Mexico City to attend the hearing, and if she did not attend, the case could be decided without her, which would certainly be disadvantageous to her. She had no choice but to return to the city. Returning to Mexico City was a tragic scene that Abril could not avoid. On November 25th, Abril overcame her fears and went to Mexico City. She feared the man she had been living with, but she knew she had to face reality to protect her children. She planned to leave the city immediately after the hearing and had already bought a plane ticket back, which Juan Carlos also knew. On the day of their custody hearing, a tragic incident occurred. After the hearing, Abril, her sons, and their lawyers got into a car and headed to the airport. However, when they reached a traffic light, a motorcyclist stopped next to their vehicle and suddenly pulled out a pistol, firing 2 shots at Abril, who was sitting in the front passenger seat. He then quickly fled the scene. 1 bullet passed through and grazed the youngest son, who was sitting in the back seat, but fortunately none of the children were seriously injured. Abril was taken to the nearest hospital, where doctors tried to save her life for more than 6 hours. However, due to severe injuries and loss of blood, they were unable to save her, and she passed away that evening. Abril's family immediately flew to the capital and asked the authorities to arrest the person they believed was behind the attack. However, law enforcement agencies had a different view. They said that without identifying the shooter, it would be difficult to determine his motive and the details involved. Meanwhile, Juan Carlos remains free and the police begin searching for the perpetrator, a process that could take a long time. The orphans have been placed in the care of relatives on their mother's side for the time being, while their father prepares for another legal battle to regain custody. Abril's sister wrote a social media post criticizing Juan for the incident. However, her account was blocked and later deleted. Nevertheless, Abril's family decided to continue fighting and draw public attention to the case. They stressed that the attack occurred on a day dedicated to protests against domestic violence, which made the incident even more despicable. The public outcry forced the prime suspect, Juan, to flee. Abril's family drew attention to the tragedy that had befallen them. At the same time, people also began to openly discuss many cases of men trying to kill women but being unpunished and still going free. Mexican politician and women's rights activist Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo has officially confirmed that Abril's case will be reinvestigated and classified as femicide. Judges could face consequences if Juan Carlos's guilt is proven. Juan Carlos, a businessman who posts frequently on social media, has called for his ex-wife's perpetrators to be found and punished to the fullest extent of the law. He has stated that despite his disagreements with his ex-wife, he would never harm the mother of his children. However, his daughter, Ana Cecilia, has taken a stand against her father and left an angry comment, accusing him of cruelty and including photos of her mother in the hospital after Juan Carlos attacked her with a baseball bat. Despite the case receiving extensive media coverage, it was decided to leave Juan free while the investigation is ongoing. He has been placed under a restraining order and must report to the police weekly. However, after he failed to appear at the scheduled time, a warrant was issued for his arrest. As expected, no one could find the defendant. Juan used his money and connections to quickly leave the country and enter the United States. Mexico contacted Interpol and reported the fugitive accused of serious crimes. The next day, Juan was declared an internationally wanted man. To investigate the case, the police hired a crime scene reconstruction expert. During this time, they also tried to locate the hired criminal. The results showed that he did not act alone. Street camera footage showed 2 vehicles following the car of Abril, her children, and their lawyer from the courthouse. The motorcyclist committed the murder and appeared to be in constant contact with the people in the aforementioned cars to receive instructions. Investigators spent months identifying some of the people involved in the incident. Finally, on March 5, 2020, 2 suspects were arrested in connection with the case. Surprisingly, the participants in this case did not resist arrest. They immediately began to confess to their actions and surrendered in the hope of reducing their sentences. Through investigation, it was determined that the real mastermind was Juan Carlos. He paid a large sum of money to 7 people who directly participated in this act. The first people to be arrested were the driver of the car that participated in the chase and the motorcyclist who fired the fatal shots. The investigation also showed that, before the incident, Juan Carlos hired several experienced criminals to act as his personal bodyguards while in prison. One of these criminals was released a week before the incident, and the other was released a few days later. After being released from prison, Juan contacted his accomplices again and asked them to find trustworthy people to carry out an assassination. He promised to pay a large sum of money to each of them if they succeeded. Once all the participants were identified, Juan transferred the promised money and provided details of the route and vehicle the victim would use. However, the most difficult part of the plan was luring Juan's ex-wife to Mexico City. He resorted to threatening Abril that he would take the children if she did not appear in court. Although she complied with the court order, she had no intention of staying in the capital and planned to return to Monteray the same day. Juan learned this information from his sources. It was not until late October 2020 that 3 people involved in the criminal conspiracy were arrested. They were initially arrested on suspicion of distributing narcotics. It was only when they were brought to the police station that it was discovered they might be involved in a serious crime. All of those arrested were members of a major drug trafficking gang headed by Maldonado, also known as Balto. He served time with Juan Carlos and protected him. Maldonado then agreed to help Juan in the murder of his ex-wife in exchange for a large reward. Maldonado was arrested in November 2020 and began to testify. According to his testimony, Juan had been looking for trustworthy people to end the life of his ex-wife, and Maldonado agreed to help. With these statements, it was clear that Juan was both a client and an organizer of the crime. The previous attack on Abril with a baseball bat was reclassified as attempted murder. The court eventually issued an arrest warrant for Juan on charges of murdering his wife. However, his whereabouts are currently unknown. By spring 2021, the remaining participants in Juan's commissioned murder were found and arrested. One of them was arrested for another crime at the time. In addition, during the extended search, the weapon used to carry out the fatal shots was found. A total of 9 people involved in this criminal group have been arrested, of whom 7 were directly involved in the pursuit and murder of Abril. Although it has been nearly 5 years since Abril's death, the main perpetrator and the person who hired him to carry out the crime, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, is still at large and his whereabouts are currently unknown. The person who directly shot the mother of 3 children was sentenced to 52 years in prison. 2 other criminals who participated in the car chase and assisted the shooter were also sentenced to 50 years in prison each. The other arrested participants are still under investigation, and their fate has not been decided. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Turpin family. David Turpin was born on October 17, 1961, in Princeton, West Virginia, to Betty and James Turpin. David came from a devoutly religious family and had a relatively normal upbringing. During his high school years at Princeton High School, David participated in various activities, including Bible Club, Chess Club, Science Club, and a cappella choir. David enrolled at Virginia Tech University after graduating from high school to pursue a degree in electrical engineering in Blacksburg, Virginia. Thanks to his exceptional skills in computer engineering, David landed jobs at leading defense technology companies such as Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. Louise Turpin was born on May 24, 1968, in Princeton, West Virginia. She is the eldest of 6 children of Wayne Robinette, a preacher, and Phyllis Robinette, who worked at Walmart and sang in the church choir. The Robinette children's home environment was tense due to frequent conflicts between their parents, which led to harsh treatment. Louise and her sisters were sexually abused by a family member as children. This traumatic experience was a secret kept within the family. According to Louise's younger sister, Elizabeth, Louise played a protective, gentle, kind, and nurturing role. She comforted her siblings during their parents' violent conflicts and protected them from abusive relatives. At the age of 15, Louise met 22-year-old David Turpin at church. They kept their relationship a secret for fear of Louise's parents' reaction. However, when the truth was discovered, Louise's mother Phyllis eventually accepted their relationship, partly because David came from a devout Christian family and Louise convinced her. David and Louise decided to keep their relationship a secret from her father, Wayne, knowing that he would be furious if he found out. In January 1985, 23-year-old David visited Louise's school, Princeton High School, where he had graduated 5 years earlier. He convinced the staff to let him take Louise out of class, and she left willingly with him. They began their journey south, planning to elope. When Louise's parents discovered she was missing, they called the police. Before the police could catch up with them, the couple headed to Texas, where they planned to secretly marry. However, when they were stopped, they agreed to return to West Virginia. When they returned home, Wayne and Phyllis's reactions were surprisingly calm. Initially, Wayne was angry with Phyllis for allowing their daughter, Louise, to date David. However, when he saw how much they loved each other, he realized that it would be difficult to separate them. So Wayne agreed to let them marry on February 11, 1985, in a small ceremony in Petersburg, Virginia. 2 years later, Louise's parents divorced and Louise's father, Wayne, took a job as the chief deputy assessor of Mercer County. After marrying David, Louise began to live more independently and freely. Louise was happy with her new life. In 1988, Louise gave birth to her first daughter, and 18 months later, their second child was born. David was then transferred to General Dynamics, and his family moved to Fort Worth, Texas. They settled in a modern neighborhood called Meadow Creek. Louise's family lived a lavish lifestyle thanks to David's high-paying job. Louise, eager to show off her family's newfound wealth, invited relatives from West Virginia to visit. Having grown up on a tight budget, Louise was happy to show off her current success. To make their visit comfortable, David and Louise paid all the expenses. The Louises welcomed a baby boy in 1991, bringing them even more joy. However, by 1992, the Louises were in debt. Despite their financial struggles, they continued to live a lavish lifestyle. In 1993, Louise became pregnant with her fourth child, a girl. In 1994, Louise's oldest daughter started first grade at Meadow Creek Elementary School. She looked neglected, with greasy, unkempt hair, dirty clothes, and poor hygiene. Her appearance made her the target of teasing by her classmates. In 1995, Louise's family welcomed a fifth child, a boy. Louise's family seemed carefree despite their financial difficulties and continued to splurge on luxuries, treating relatives to expensive meals. When Louise's younger sister Elizabeth joined them on their 1996 vacation in Fort Worth, they stopped at a casino in Louisiana on the way. While at the casino, Louise asked Elizabeth to babysit the children so she and David could gamble. They asked Elizabeth not to tell anyone about this, knowing that it was against their Christian values. During this visit, David and Louise's gambling led to losses. Tensions became apparent when David claimed that Louise had a serious gambling addiction and blamed Louise for their financial difficulties. While staying with Louise's family, Elizabeth was shocked by the family's disturbing behavior. David and Louise did not show much affection for their children and tightly controlled every aspect of their lives. Elizabeth was particularly concerned about David's behavior, as he often invaded Elizabeth's privacy by entering the bathroom while she was showering, making her feel uncomfortable and insecure. In May 1997, the Turpins had their fifth child. By September of that year, concerns about their eldest daughter and the possible signs of sexual abuse began to grow. In 1998, the family had a sixth child. Although David had a well-paying job, the family's financial situation worsened due to their frequent gambling, which caused significant financial strain. In the spring of 1999, the eldest daughter dropped out of school, as did the other children. Louise and David announced that they were homeschooling their children. In late 1998, the bank foreclosed on the family's home in Fort Worth, so Louise and David moved to Rio Vista, Texas, a less populated area. The new home that Louise and David had in Rio Vista was in serious disrepair when they moved in. It was dirty, stained, and smelled bad. Before moving into the Rio Vista home, the Louises had their 7th child. Over the next 6 years, the family added 5 more children. Over time, the parents, David and Louise Turpin, became increasingly irresponsible and abusive. They physically harmed their children, beating, choking, and whipping them with belts, often for trivial reasons such as not letting them go to the bathroom. The children were also severely neglected in terms of personal hygiene, with some only bathing once a year. Despite purchasing nutritious food, David and Louise often withheld food from their children, forcing them to starve. The parents would tease their children by leaving uneaten meals in plain sight. Instead, the children were fed cheap frozen meals, resulting in severe malnutrition. This neglect was evident in the children's slow development, pale skin, and youthful appearances that did not match their actual ages. In 2004, Louise's family moved to a nicer trailer, leaving behind their old home in Rio Vista, which had become uninhabitable due to years of neglect, garbage accumulation, and rodent infestation. In 2008, Louise Turpin, then 40, had a shocking conversation with her sister Teresa. Louise revealed that she and her husband David had abandoned their Christian education and stopped attending church. Instead, they had become interested in Satanism and used Ouija boards. Louise also confessed that she and David had engaged in wife swapping, a lifestyle that involved having sex with other couples they met online. What was even more disturbing was that they often left their younger children at home, in the care of their older siblings, while they went out to meet strangers they had met online. This drastic change in Louise, who had always been caring and responsible, worried her older sister Teresa. Despite their financial struggles, Louise's family often went to Disneyland in matching outfits, taking lots of happy photos. Louise made sure to send these photos to her family and her parents. The only indication to Louise's family that the children were okay was through these photos, which showed them appearing happy despite being very thin. In 2014, Louise's family moved to Perris, California, about 20 miles north of Murrieta. By this time, the child abuse had reached an extremely violent level. David and Louise had tied their children to their beds with ropes. If the children tried to escape, the ropes were replaced with chains and locks. The children were locked in the room for around 20 hours a day, forced to endure the stench that permeated the air. In 2015, the family welcomed their 13th and final child. Soon after, the family traveled to Las Vegas to celebrate David and Louise's 30th wedding anniversary. Faced with the horrors of their living conditions, Louise and David's 17-year-old daughter made the brave decision to seek help by reporting the abuse to the police. She climbed out of the window and quickly called the police on the phone. During a tense 20-minute 911 call, she detailed the deplorable living conditions and the countless abuses she and her siblings endured. With photographs of their desperate situation as evidence, she waited for the police to arrive. When police arrived at the scene, they witnessed a horrifying scene: a severely malnourished girl who appeared to be about 10 years old. The girl led police to the front door, where they found Louise. Upon entering the home, police immediately smelled a strong stench that made it difficult to breathe. Despite the strong odor, police continued to investigate and made a horrifying discovery: 3 younger children chained to beds. The home was in a state of extreme disarray, with trash and dirt covering the floor because there was no toilet access. Police quickly took the younger children to Riverside University Medical Center for evaluation and care, while the older children were taken to Corona Regional Medical Center. David and Louise Turpin were arrested on January 14, 2018, for child abuse and torture. Within 4 days, they faced multiple charges. Each of them was charged with 12 counts of torture, 7 counts of abuse, 6 counts of child abuse and neglect, and 12 counts of false imprisonment. David Turpin also faces a separate charge of lewd conduct with a child under 14. Among their children, a 2-year-old child showed no obvious signs of abuse. In addition to being abused, the children were treated extremely cruelly by their parents. They suffered severe physical abuse that resulted in neurological damage. The children of Louise and David lacked basic life skills and knowledge. Although their parents, David and Louise Turpin, bought them toys, the children were not allowed to play with them. They were forced to stay up until the early hours of the morning, often until 4 or 5 a.m., and were not allowed to go to bed before that time. In 2018, the court took action against the Turpin parents. On January 24th, the judge ordered that David and Louise have no contact with their children for 3 years, and that all contact be through their attorney. On June 21st of the same year, the court decided that there was enough evidence against David and Louise to proceed to trial. The trial concluded on February 22, 2019. On that day, David and Louise Turpin pleaded guilty to 14 counts including torture, abuse, false imprisonment, and child endangerment. During the trial, David and Louise had an emotional reunion with their children. The children appeared to have forgiven their parents and were affectionate toward David and Louise. Each expressed a wish for their parents to be well and shared that their lives were going well. David and Louise sincerely apologized for their past actions and expressed their deep love for their children, wishing them success in life. David and Louise were subsequently sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. As of 2022, Louise, 53, and David, 60, are both eligible for parole in 2037. The severe abuse and neglect in their home shocked the community and beyond. The community came together to support the children, giving them hope and a new start in life. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Laci Peterson. Laci Peterson was born on May 4, 1975, to Sharon and Dennis. However, her parents' marriage was short-lived, and they divorced when Laci and her older brother Brent were still young. Following the divorce, Laci's life changed with the introduction of her stepfather, Ron. As a dairy farmer, Ron became a significant influence in Laci's life, serving as a father figure and helping to raise her. Laci was a bright and cheerful person, known for her captivating smile and lively personality. She was a social butterfly, always eager to engage in conversations and thrive in social situations. Laci growing up on a dairy farm, Laci has a strong connection to nature. She spends a lot of time exploring and enjoying the natural beauty around her. One of her favorite activities was gardening with her mother. This shared hobby would eventually shape Laci's interests and career path as an adult. Laci was a student at Thomas Downey High School, where she was a cheerleader and made a lasting impression with her outgoing personality. After graduating, she attended California Polytechnic University, where she studied ornamental horticulture. During her time at Cal Poly, Laci would often visit a friend who worked at a restaurant in Morro Bay. It was there that she met Scott Peterson, a coworker of her friend's. Laci was immediately attracted to Scott and decided to take the initiative by giving him her phone number. Scott quickly responded, and they had an instant connection during their first conversation. They were eager to meet in person, and Scott asked Laci out on a date. Their first date was a deep-sea fishing trip, but it didn't go as smoothly as they had hoped. Laci became seasick during the outing, which put a damper on their initial encounter. Lacey and Scott's relationship continued to blossom despite a rocky start. As they grew closer, they decided to take a significant step and move in together. Before meeting Lacey, Scott had aspirations of becoming a professional golfer. But as their relationship deepened, his priorities shifted, and he chose to focus on a career in business instead. After Lacey graduated from Cal Poly in 1997, Scott graduated the following year. Their graduation marked the beginning of an exciting new chapter in their lives. They married on August 9, 1997, in a beautiful ceremony at a resort in San Luis Obispo County's Ayala Valley. Surrounded by friends and family, they exchanged vows and celebrated their love. Following their wedding, Lacey and Scott embarked on a new venture together, opening a sports bar called The Shack in San Luis Obispo, California. Although business was initially slow, they persevered, and over time, they began to attract a steady stream of customers. Weekends at The Shack were always packed. After many years of success, Lacey and Scott made the difficult decision to sell the bar in 2000. Although the bar was a good source of income, they felt it was time to move on and explore new opportunities. After weighing their options, they sold The Shack and moved to Lacey's hometown of Modesto, California. In October 2000, Lacey and Scott bought a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home in a desirable neighborhood. After the move, Lacey took a part-time job as a substitute teacher, while Scott worked for a European fertilizer company called Branch. Lacey and Scott's life was thriving, with Lacey excelling in domestic duties, making their home warm and inviting. In 2002, they received the wonderful news that they were going to have a baby, with the due date set for February 10, 2003. They was overjoyed to discover they were having a boy and had already chosen the name Connor. Their happiness was short-lived, however. On December 24, 2002, Scott departed for a fishing trip at the Berkeley Marina, leaving Lacey behind at 9:30 a.m. Scott noticed Lacey was missing after he finished showering. He had previously been fishing and had showered and washed his clothes as soon as he got home. When he couldn't find Lacey, he became worried and contacted her mother and stepfather, Sharon and Ron. However, neither of them had heard from her all day. As the hours passed and Lacey remained missing, Scott and Sharon decided to file a missing persons report with the police around 6 p.m. They stressed to the police the urgency of the situation, explaining that Lacey was 7 months pregnant with their unborn son, Connor. The police began questioning Scott about his activities on the day of Lacey's disappearance. According to Scott, he had gone fishing at the Berkeley Marina, which is about 90 miles from their home in Modesto. However, the police had suspicions of foul play in Lacey's disappearance from the very beginning of their investigation. During the initial search for Lacey, the police were not suspicious of her disappearance. Lacey's family publicly defended her husband Scott, as they had seemed perfect. However, as the investigation continued, police interest in Scott grew. Nearly a month after Lacey's disappearance, a shocking discovery was made about Scott. Investigators discovered that while married to Lacey, Scott had been cheating on Lacey, having a long-term affair with a woman named Amber Fry. Amber Fry first contacted police on December 30, 2002. She told them that she had been having an affair with Scott Peterson, Lacey's missing husband. Amber claimed that she had met Scott on November 20, 2002, and initially believed that he was single. However, Scott had told Amber just 2 weeks before Lacey's disappearance that he was a widower, suggesting he would be spending his first holiday season without his wife. This revelation raised suspicions among the police, who wondered if Scott had already planned to murder his pregnant wife. To gather evidence, the police asked Amber to call Scott while being recorded, hoping to capture a potential confession. The police also informed Lacey's family about Scott's infidelity. After learning about Scott's infidelity, Lacey's family publicly withdrew their support for him. Meanwhile, a massive search effort was underway to find Lacey. The search was a collaborative effort between law enforcement, Lacey's loved ones, and hundreds of volunteers. Over 900 people participated in the search during the first 2 days alone. A police officer working on the case expressed skepticism that Lacey had left her home voluntarily on December 24, 2002. Lacey's disappearance shocked the media, capturing public attention with the story of a pregnant wife who went missing on Christmas Eve. Initially, a $5,000 reward was offered for information leading to her safe return, but as time passed with no leads, the reward was increased to $500,000 to raise awareness and gather information. Posters of Lacey were displayed prominently in Modesto, California, and a friend's husband created a website to help spread the word about her disappearance. On April 13, 2003, a couple walking their dog at Richmond's Point Isabel Regional Shoreline Park made a disturbing discovery in a marshy area of the San Francisco Bay. They found the decomposing body of a male infant. The next day, another person discovered the body of a pregnant woman on the shore of the east side of the bay, about a mile away from where the baby was found. DNA tests confirmed on April 18, 2003, that the bodies were those of Lacey Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. They were buried at Wood Cemetery. The autopsy revealed that the baby had 1.5 loops of nylon tape around his neck and a significant cut on his body. Lacey's autopsy showed that Lacey had 2 cracked ribs, her upper torso had been disemboweled, and her head and limbs were missing. The medical examiner determined that the baby died in the womb and was expelled from Lacey's body after her death. Agents from the FBI and the Modesto Police Department searched the home of Scott and Lacey Peterson, looking for evidence that might link them to Lacey's disappearance. During the search, they found the hair caught in Scott's pliers on his fishing boat. The FBI analyzed the hair and matched it to Lacey's DNA. In addition to the home search, the FBI also investigated Scott's truck and warehouse for any signs of evidence. They also examined Scott's boat, where they found a homemade anchor made with a 90-pound bag of concrete. Scott claimed he used the concrete to repair his driveway, but investigators believed he had actually made multiple anchors, using them to weigh down Lacey's body in the San Francisco Bay. The police identified the bodies found in the San Francisco Bay as Lacey and Connor. This led to Scott's arrest near a golf course. At the time of his arrest, Scott's appearance had changed significantly, as his dark brown hair was now blonde. A search of his vehicle revealed a large amount of cash, $115,000, as well as survival gear, camping equipment, and 4 cell phones. The police also found 2 driver's licenses, one belonging to Scott and the other linked to his brother. This evidence suggested that Scott was planning to escape the state. Scott's father provided an alternative explanation for the driver's license found in Scott's car. According to his father, Scott had borrowed his brother's license to get a discount at the golf course. The father also explained that Scott's car was packed with belongings because Scott was living out of his car to avoid the media attention surrounding his case. A year after his arrest, Scott's trial began in June 2004. During the opening arguments, the prosecution presented its case, claiming that Scott's affair with Amber was the motive for Lacey's murder. The prosecution highlighted Scott's suspicious behavior before and after Lacey's disappearance, including inconsistencies in his alibi. Initially, Scott told police he was fishing on the day Lacey went missing, but later told others he was golfing. The prosecution also pointed out that Scott asked police if they had used cadaver dogs to search a park where Lacey walked their dog, suggesting that Scott was aware of the potential crime scene and trying to cover his tracks. In response, Scott's defense team presented a strong argument. They acknowledged Scott's history of infidelity but argued that it did not necessarily make him guilty of murder. They claimed that Scott would not ruin his life for someone he had only dated a few times. The defense suggested that a possible explanation for Lacey's hair being found in Scott's boat was a previous visit to the marina with Lacey. Other witnesses, including a realtor and a salesman, testified that Scott was actively trying to sell their home and trade in Lacey's car, respectively, in the months following her disappearance. The prosecution presented this evidence as proof of Scott's guilt. Additionally, Amber, Scott's mistress, testified about their affair, and the jury listened to secretly recorded phone calls between they. During Scott's trial, a hydrologist and a tidal expert testified that it was possible for Lacey's body to have been dumped in the area where Scott claimed to have been fishing on the day she disappeared. However, the defense argued that there was not enough credible evidence to link Scott directly to the crime. They proposed an alternative theory, that someone had kidnapped Lacey on Christmas Eve 2002, held her captive until she gave birth, and then disposed of both bodies in the San Francisco Bay. Scott's attorney emphasized that there was no direct evidence connecting Scott to the crime and suggested that other suspects could have been responsible. On November 12, 2004, the jury in California found Scott guilty of 2 counts of murder, first-degree murder for Lacey's death and second-degree murder for the death of their unborn son, Connor. Lacey's murder was classified as first-degree murder with special circumstances due to the involvement of the fetus. Scott's classification made him eligible for the death penalty. After his conviction, the trial's penalty phase began, focusing on determining his punishment. The jury considered his criminal history, aggravating factors, and mitigating factors before unanimously deciding on the death penalty. In August 2020, the California court upheld Scott's conviction but vacated his death sentence, with the judge ordering Scott to be resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As a result, Scott was transferred from San Quentin State Prison, where he had been on death row, to Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California, on the judge's order. In response to Lacey's case, President George W. Bush signed the Unborn Victims of Violence Act into law on April 1, 2004. Lacey's mother and stepfather attended the signing ceremony, standing alongside President George W. Bush as the legislation took effect. This law, also known as Lacey and Connor's Law, aimed to provide legal protection for unborn children in cases where their mothers are victims of violence. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Mary Catherine Higdon. Mary Catherine Higdon, born in 1994, was a lively child known for her sense of humor and ability to make others laugh with her witty remarks and impersonations. She enjoyed spending time outdoors and exploring nature, often taking walks around town with her pet frog perched on a shoestring. This early exposure to the natural world instilled in her a deep love and respect for the environment and animals. Mary was also a talented and creative performer. She regularly performed for her family in homemade plays, showing off her vivid imagination and ability to attract attention on stage. Her family recognized her natural talent and envisioned a bright future for her. As she grew older, Mary developed another passion, that was firearms. Under proper guidance, she learned to handle guns responsibly, respecting their power and potential. Through dedication and practice, Mary became a skilled marksman during her high school years. Mary Catherine met the love of her life, Stephen Freeman, who was born on January 1, 1995, in Griffin, Georgia. He was raised in a close-knit family with his parents and brother. As a child, Stephen was known to be happy and friendly, with many friends who described him as laid-back, kind, and helpful. Those who knew him said he genuinely cared for everyone around him. Stephen had a deep appreciation for nature and enjoyed spending time outdoors. Their love for nature led them to enjoy activities like hiking, camping, fishing, and hunting together. This shared interest laid the groundwork for their robust relationship. After graduating from high school, they started a new chapter in their lives. As high school sweethearts, they decided to take their relationship to the next level by moving into a house together in Griffin, Georgia. Living in their own space excited Mary Catherine and Stephen. Stephen's mother welcomed Mary Catherine as more than just her son's partner. She genuinely considered her a daughter and accepted her into their family. Mary Catherine and Stephen visited Stephen's parents every Sunday for a big family dinner, a tradition that strengthened their bond and cemented Mary Catherine's place within the family. Stephen's friends initially had reservations about his relationship with Mary Catherine. However, as they spent more time together, they grew to appreciate how well-suited Mary Catherine and Stephen was. Mary Catherine brought happiness and joy into Stephen's life, and her love for Stephen was admirable. Stephen worked as a metal worker and repaired roofs, while Mary Catherine was a part-time teacher's assistant at a preschool in Milner, Georgia. She also worked at a sporting goods store, where she sold guns and learned about basic gun safety, including how to hold, load, and shoot a gun. This experience was shared with Stephen, who owned several firearms, including shotguns and rifles, which he used for hunting and target practice. He also kept a Glock 42 at home for protection. By the summer of 2018, Mary Catherine and Stephen had been in a relationship for 5 years and were still living together in their apartment in Griffin, Georgia. However, their happiness was shattered on the night of August 1st when Mary Catherine made a frantic 911 call. When the dispatcher answered, Mary Catherine cried out that she had accidentally shot her boyfriend. The police quickly arrived at the apartment and found Mary Catherine in a state of distress. Mary Catherine, hysterical and overcome with grief, cried and hyperventilated as she knelt beside Stephen's lifeless body, repeatedly screaming, "I cannot lose him." Her voice was filled with anguish and despair. As the police gently moved Mary Catherine away from Stephen, they were able to assess his condition. They found that he had been shot in the chest but was still alive. An ambulance was called to rush Stephen to the hospital, where doctors worked to save his life. Despite the medical team's best efforts, Stephen's condition continued to worsen, and he eventually passed away due to the severity of his injuries. Mary Catherine accompanied the police to the police department for a formal interview after Stephen was taken to the hospital. She began by recounting the events of the night that led to her accidentally shooting Stephen. According to Mary Catherine, she was handing Stephen the gun because he usually kept it on the side of his bed at night for safety. However, she stated that they never kept a bullet in the magazine of the guns. During the interview, the police noticed the smell of alcohol on Mary Catherine's breath. As the questioning continued, Mary Catherine's story about the shooting changed. Initially, she said she handed the gun to Stephen, but later claimed she tossed it to him instead. The police were skeptical about her story, knowing that the gun would not fire randomly when thrown, and someone must have pulled the trigger. Furthermore, the location of Stephen's gunshot wound led the police to believe that Mary Catherine must have been pointing the gun directly at him for the bullet to strike where it did. At one point during the interview, Mary Catherine said she shot Stephen out of anger. However, due to technical issues, only feedback was recorded during this part of the conversation, despite the police recording the entire interview. The police believed they had sufficient forensic evidence to prove that Mary Catherine deliberately shot her boyfriend Stephen, even without a crucial part of the recording. At their apartment, investigators found signs of a heated argument before the shooting. The presence of scattered food throughout the house indicated that an altercation had taken place. Additionally, it was found that police officers had visited the house of Mary and Stephen 5 times in the past year due to domestic disputes. The police also discovered evidence that the gun used to shoot Stephen was loaded on the night of the incident, contradicting Mary Catherine's claims. Furthermore, cooking grease was also found on both the gun and the magazine. This discovery led the police to conclude that Mary Catherine, who was cooking dinner at the time, had loaded the gun. After Mary Catherine shot Stephen, the police interviewed his friends to gather information about their relationship. According to Stephen's friends, the relationship between Mary Catherine and Stephen was toxic and marked by constant arguing. They reported that Mary Catherine and Stephen frequently had heated confrontations. Stephen's friends reported that Mary Catherine was extremely possessive and verbally abusive towards him. They claimed she showed signs of mental instability, which made their relationship increasingly tense. Whenever Stephen tried to take some space and leave their apartment, Mary Catherine would bombard him with texts and calls, forcing him to block her. One friend revealed that Stephen had confided in him about Mary Catherine pulling a gun on him at least 3 times in the past. Stephen didn't report incidents to the police because he worried Mary Catherine would get in trouble. His primary concern was her well-being, even when his own safety was at risk. When his friends found out that Mary Catherine accidentally shot Stephen, they struggled to believe it since she knew how to handle a firearm. 3 months before the shooting, Stephen told a friend that Mary Catherine was behaving erratically, screaming outside, and trying to shoot both him and herself. A month later, Stephen confided in another friend that Mary Catherine had pointed a gun at him before, but the most recent incident made him genuinely fear she would follow through. By July 2018, Stephen was exhausted with Mary Catherine's behavior and considered leaving her after 7 years together. He planned to secretly move to a new town while she was out due to fearing her reaction if she knew. Police later discovered text messages from July 30, 2018, 2 days before Mary Catherine fatally shot Stephen. The first text message sent by Stephen to Mary Catherine on July 30 read, "Good morning, beautiful. Don't forget." Mary Catherine responded with, "Have a great day." Stephen then replied, "You too. Love you." However, the police found that the following night, July 31st, Stephen spent the evening at a friend's house and did not return Mary Catherine's texts or calls because they was fighting. On the night of the shooting, August 1st, Mary Catherine was at home preparing dinner, but Stephen was not there. She reached out to Stephen's mother. She informed her that Stephen was with his friend. Angry at Stephen, Mary Catherine started driving to his friend's house. As she drove, she spotted Stephen sitting in the passenger seat of his friend's truck. Mary Catherine pulled alongside Stephen's friend and started yelling at Stephen. Stephen tried to calm Mary Catherine down, assuring her that he was on his way home. Mary Catherine allegedly pointed a gun at Stephen multiple times, according to his friends. However, Mary strongly denied these claims, stating she never pulled a gun on him. On another hand, Mary Catherine did admit to threatening to take her own life with a gun on several occasions. Stephen's mother believed that he stayed with Mary Catherine due to her repeated threats of self-harm, which made Stephen fear for Mary's life if he left. On the night of the incident, Mary Catherine claimed that Stephen became violent, throwing the dinner she prepared in her face. She stated that she picked up the gun for self-defense, trying to scare Stephen away and make him leave the apartment. According to her, Stephen lunged at her, causing her to back away, and the next thing she knew, he was bleeding from the chest. At the time of Stephen's shooting, Mary Catherine did not tell the police about Stephen's history of violence towards her because she was embarrassed. According to Mary Catherine, Stephen had been violent and controlling in the past, even kicking her out of bed with enough force to make her hit her head on the door frame. However, Stephen's friends had a different perspective on the relationship. They claimed to have witnessed Mary Catherine hitting Stephen, including one instance where she slapped him hard in the face. On the other hand, Mary Catherine's sister had a different view of their relationship. She reported seeing bruises on Mary Catherine's arm 2 weeks before Stephen was shot. When she asked Mary Catherine about the bruises, Mary Catherine said that Stephen had grabbed her. After investigating Stephen's death, the police concluded that it was a murder. As a result, Mary Catherine was charged with murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. The state offered Mary Catherine a plea deal and receive a life sentence with the possibility of parole. However, she rejected the offer and chose to went to trial, pleading not guilty and arguing that she shot Stephen in self-defense. The trial began on June 17, 2019, nearly a year after Stephen's death. Mary Catherine's attorneys claimed that she acted in self-defense, citing her genuine fear of Stephen due to his violent and abusive history. They presented evidence of Stephen's controlling, manipulative, and violent behavior to support their case. During the trial, Mary Catherine testified in her own defense, sharing emotional accounts of the constant abuse she suffered at the hands of Stephen. She described a pervasive pattern of physical, mental, emotional, verbal, and sexual abuse, stating that Stephen would frequently hit her, humiliate her, and subject her. Mary Catherine reported that Stephen subjected her to various forms of abuse. She shared instances where he physically and verbally abused her. The abuse had a profound impact on her physical and emotional well-being, leaving her feeling trapped and fearful for her life. During the trial, Mary Catherine's defense presented a text message from Stephen, stating that she would be punished when he returned home. When questioned about the meaning of this message, Mary Catherine explained that Stephen would physically abuse her and demand that she be a better girlfriend. The defense also presented another text message, in which Stephen warned Mary Catherine not to hit him, threatening to retaliate with twice the force. In her testimony, Mary Catherine described a red room where Stephen and Mary Catherine engaged in aggressive and sometimes violent intimacy, likening it to a concept from the popular book series, 50 Shades of Grey. Mary's defense attorneys presented a text message from Stephen, which stated, "I miss you too much, I'm coming home, and you're about to get it bad, you're going to the red room." Mary Catherine also testified that Stephen sexually assaulted her on 2 occasions, one of which occurred after they returned from a vacation to Walt Disney World. Mary Catherine reported that their intercourse had become increasingly aggressive, and she expressed her discomfort to Stephen, asking him to stop. However, instead of heeding her pleas, Stephen allegedly intensified his efforts. He claimed that she had received various gifts at Disney World and now owed him what was rightfully his. According to Mary Catherine, Stephen told her that she had to give him what he wanted and what he deserved. The defense presented additional evidence in the form of text messages from Stephen to support Mary Catherine's claims of abuse. These messages were vulgar, threatening, and demonstrated a pattern of verbal assaults directed towards Mary Catherine. The defense had over 60 pages of text messages from Stephen that showcased his abusive behavior. One particular image sent while Stephen was out with a group of friends was particularly disturbing. In the image, Stephen was holding a large dead fish aloft with the caption, "This is you." Another message from Stephen to Mary Catherine, after she cheated on him, read that he would wreck her for her wrecking him. The defense also alleged that Stephen struggled with addiction to drugs and alcohol, which led to violent outbursts. During the conversation about the night Mary Catherine shot Stephen, she claimed that she ended their relationship, not Stephen. According to Mary Catherine, Stephen did not take the breakup and acted like he was going to attack her. Fearing for her safety, she grabbed a gun in self-defense. Mary Catherine stated that the last words she exchanged with Stephen before shooting him were, "Get out of my house." However, Stephen's friends and family disagreed with Mary Catherine's portrayal of him as violent, abusive, and dangerous. They described him as laid-back, friendly, and caring. His mother stated she was unaware of Stephen sending Mary Catherine disturbing text messages or threatening violence. While she did not condone such behavior, she believed Stephen only acted out of anger. During cross-examination, the state questioned Mary Catherine about never reporting the alleged abuse by Stephen. The state also pointed out that hours before the shooting, Mary Catherine had been searching for violent and sexually explicit images online while babysitting. Mary Catherine claimed she was looking at those sites to get ideas to make Stephen happy and convince him to stay with her. The state noted that Mary Catherine had altered her story about the night of the shooting at least 10 times since her initial interview a year prior to the trial. A crucial piece of evidence presented in court to support the prosecution's theory that Mary Catherine intentionally shot Stephen was a text message he sent her. The message stated that she had pointed a gun at him multiple times before, and the last incident had scared him. Additionally, Stephen's friends testified in court, sharing their accounts of witnessing Mary Catherine's abuse towards him. Their testimonies corroborated the prosecution's argument that Mary Catherine had a history of violence against Stephen, contradicting her claims that he was the abuser. After deliberating for 4 hours, the jury delivered a verdict of not guilty on the charges of malice murder, felony murder, assault, and possession of a firearm in the commission of a felony. As a result, Mary Catherine was released from prison. The verdict shocked Stephen's loved ones, who were stunned by the decision. In a later admission, members of the jury revealed that they believed Mary Catherine had intentionally shot and killed Stephen. However, they acknowledged that there was insufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt why she had shot him. This lack of evidence made it challenging to determine whether the shooting was murder or justified as self-defense. The jury was also unable to reach a consensus on the validity of all the accusations against both Stephen and Mary Catherine. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shanynthia Gardner. Shanynthia Gardner was born in the late 1980s in Memphis, Tennessee. Not much is known about her early life. She is the daughter of Eleanor Snodgrass from Madison, Alabama. Shanynthia was a slim, beautiful brunette with curly hair as a child. Shanynthia was a multi-talented person. Her creative spirit was evident in her songwriting abilities, which helped her become a local celebrity. Shanynthia also has a keen eye for fashion and photography, attends church regularly, and spends time with her family. Shanynthia seems well-rounded and full of promise for a bright future. Shanynthia met Daryl Clayton when she was 14 years old. They became close friends. As they grew up and graduated from high school, their friendship turned into love. Shanynthia and Daryl often spent time together. In 2008, Daryl was accused of assaulting a woman, albeit unintentionally, which led to charges being filed against him. Fortunately for him, the charges were eventually dropped. Shanynthia and Daryl did not get married, but they decided to live together as a couple. In 2008, they had a son named Kason. Shanynthia took on a motherly role, not only to her own son but also to Daryl's 2 children from a previous relationship. Shanynthia was a devoted mother and caring partner, which made her special to those around her. Although Shaninthia's relationship with Daryl did not last long, to Daryl, Shanynthia remained a loving wife and mother. Her life took a new turn when Shanynthia married Martin Gardner, the man who brought her joy and gave her a stable life. Shanynthia won Martin over with her kindness, love for children, and gentle nature. Their relationship developed quickly, and in September 2013, they decided to start a life together, moving into an apartment complex in southeast Shelby County. Their wedding marked the beginning. Shanynthia and her husband Martin started their family with the arrival of their first child, baby Talon Gardner. Their family grew as little Saya Gardner was born in 2014, followed by 2 more girls, Savi and Yahtzee. Martin and Shanynthia had 4 children together, in addition to a child from her previous relationship, creating a busy and happy home. Shanynthia prioritizes her family's health and also enjoys her part-time job at the Children's Hospital. Additionally, she supports a charity center that focuses on raising funds to support children. Her compassionate nature fuels her passion to dedicate her life to helping others. On July 1, 2016, Martin had a phone conversation with Shanynthia around noon, as she was getting ready to watch a movie with their children. The couple were chatting quietly. Shanynthia suddenly lost control and grabbed a kitchen knife. She walked into the living room, where she brutally attacked her 6-month-old daughter, Yahtzee, without any apparent reason or provocation. The innocent child, unable to defend herself, was tragically killed at the hands of her mother. The eldest child, a 7-year-old boy named Kason, witnessed the horrific scene. Too young to understand the situation, the boy ran away from home. Shanynthia, still armed with the knife, pursued her son out of the house, intent on continuing her violent rampage. The boy's terrified screams caught the attention of nearby neighbors. Realizing that the neighbor had seen Kason, Shanynthia immediately stopped. She returned to the house where Savi and Talon were lying. Upon entering the house, Shanynthia rushed to the bedroom where her young children were lying and rushed to kill them. Neighbors who witnessed the horrific scene quickly contacted the police for assistance, pleading for help in rescuing Kason and his siblings. The police arrived at Shaninthia's home. They found Shanynthia covered in blood, along with her 4 dead children. The scene shocked everyone. Shanynthia, still holding her cell phone in her hand, calmly called her husband Martin and confessed to killing the children. By the time the police arrived, the incident was over, and an eerie silence had fallen over the once happy home of the Shanynthia family. The house was now a scene of horror, with blood stains in every corner. A bloody knife, recovered by the police. When clergy and police arrived to assist, they were confronted with a horrifying reality. The police began gathering information and conducting an investigation. Shanynthia was held without bail and her trial is scheduled for July 5th. Michelle Jaiman, Shaninthia's co-worker, defended Shanynthia on social media. Michelle highlighted the possibility of Shanynthia suffering from postpartum depression. Cases like Shaninthia's have sparked discussions about mental illness and such tragic events. Dr. Joel Rissman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, confirmed that mothers killing their children is extremely rare and is usually related to underlying mental health issues. Dr. Diane Barnes, an expert in psychology and postpartum health, made a crucial distinction between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. According to her, these are 2 distinct conditions with unique symptoms. Dr. Diane cast doubt on the idea that Shanynthia Gardner was suffering from postpartum depression at the time of her actions. Craig Morton was appointed as Shaninthia's defense attorney. During the July 5, 2016 court hearing, Shanynthia participated via video link, but remained completely silent, not answering any questions from Judge L. Lambert. After the trial, Shanynthia was admitted to a mental health institute. Meanwhile, Morton's attorney and prosecutor Jennifer Nichols were preparing to file a warrant for evidence gathered in the case. In January 2017, Shanynthia faced formal charges on 4 counts, 2 counts of child abuse, 1 count of aggravated murder, and 1 count of child neglect. Her mother, Sonia, was shocked and confused when she learned about the horrific incident and immediately rushed to the scene to find her grandson. Initially, Sonia suspected that Shanynthia and Martin were divorcing, and the prospect of raising 5 children alone may have driven Shanynthia to make the desperate decision. Shaninthia's ex-husband, Kason's father, said, although he was not his son's guardian after the relationship ended, he was still able to visit Kason whenever he wanted. However, the last time he saw his son was in November 2014. He noticed that Shaninthia's behavior was becoming more and more extreme. Every time he tried to contact Kason, he was unsuccessful. Those close to Shanynthia observed a change in her. She began to feel irritable, which gradually turned into anxiety, paranoia, and panic attacks. Her behavior became erratic and unpredictable, leading many to suspect that she might be suffering from postpartum depression. This change shocked those around her, as Shanynthia had previously been a kind person, and the sudden change in her behavior left many wondering what had led to this tragic situation. The first signs of unusual behavior began in March 2015. Shanynthia Gardner left work and picked up her 5 children. She then drove away from her Memphis home, down an unfamiliar road. Her husband, Martin Gardner, initially thought she had gone for a walk in a nearby park to clear her head. However, as hours passed and Shanynthia did not return home, Martin became concerned and decided to report her missing to the police. He put out an alert for her car, which contained her and their 5 children. Unknown to Martin, Shanynthia had driven more than 74 miles east to Corinth, a place where she had no relatives. She was eventually found in the emergency room of St. Francis Hospital, although the circumstances surrounding her arrival remain unclear. Upon examination, medical staff discovered shallow cuts to Shaninthia's neck and one wrist. It appeared she had attempted to harm herself, leaving many questions unanswered for her young children, who were too young to fully understand the situation. Following her return home, Shaninthia's behavior became increasingly strange. She claimed that someone was threatening her and her family, but she provided no details about the identity of the person or their motives. Martin was shocked, as there had been no previous threats or incidents. Additionally, Shanynthia began expressing dissatisfaction with her job and workload when around family and friends, stating that she felt terrible about it. She eventually started claiming that some of her co-workers were out to harm her. Despite these erratic claims, Shanynthia did not display any signs of violent or abusive behavior towards her children or others. Shanynthia Gardner's trial begins in 2021. Her defense team is focusing on her mental illness. The judge, James of the Shelby County Criminal Court, rejected the defense's argument, and in December 2021, Shanynthia Gardner was found guilty of all charges. Shanynthia Gardner, then 34, was sentenced in February 2022. She received a life sentence for each murder charge and 15 years for each count of child abuse and neglect. Due to Tennessee's laws, Shanynthia Gardner will be eligible for parole after serving a total of 51 years in prison. After the sentencing, the prosecutor expressed his agreement with the decision, stating that it aligned with his goal of achieving justice for Martin and his children. Martin felt a sense of relief knowing that Shanynthia would no longer be able to harm any children. A vigil was held at the apartment complex where the family lived, attended by neighbors, family members, law enforcement officers, and others. Sonia, the grandmother of one of the victims, was among those in attendance. The group lit red and white candles and prayed for the victims. Following the loss, Martin's colleagues set up a social media account to help him prepare for the funeral of his 4 children. During the service, Martin gave an emotional final speech, recalling his home as a place filled with happiness when his children and Shanynthia were present, and expressing his intention to keep that memory alive. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Sherry Miller. Sherry Miller was born on October 13, 1971, in Flint, Michigan, a once prosperous Midwestern auto industry city that had fallen on hard times. Her childhood was marked by hardship, growing up without a father figure in her life. Her mother led a loose lifestyle, often drinking heavily and changing partners frequently. Sherry's childhood was spent in a trailer next to her mother's men, who regularly abused her. According to Sherry, she was abused from the age of 3 or 4. By the age of 16, she had left to fend for herself. At 17, she married, became pregnant, and had a child. However, her marriage eventually ended. Sherry remarried and divorced again. Her second husband, Tribby, had a history of violence and was convicted of second-degree child abuse for assaulting his own child, resulting in multiple skull fractures. Although Tribby was tried for abusing her 6-year-old daughter, he was acquitted due to insufficient evidence. By the age of 26, Sherry was a single mother of 3 children, each from a different father. To support her family, she worked multiple jobs. Although she may not be a model, Sherry possessed a charm that drew people to her. In 1997, Sherry's life changed when she started working as an accountant at B&Auto Salvage, a company owned by 47-year-old Bruce Miller. It was there that she saw a man who could provide for her and her children. Bruce Miller was born on July 26, 1951. He spent many years working at General Motors. After leaving General Motors, Bruce Miller moved into the auto scrap business, where he would collect old cars and resell their parts. Bruce Miller was married 3 times and had a passion for racing and socializing. He was known for his generosity and openness to others. When Sherry joined his company as an employee, Bruce Miller initially wasn't interested in her romantically. However, Sherry eventually caught his attention, and they began an office romance despite their 20-year age difference. Their relationship progressed quickly. Bruce Miller was delighted with the attention Sherry was getting, and the couple quickly moved from dating to living together. Just 4 months later, on April 23, 1999, Bruce Miller and Sherry were married in Las Vegas. Sherry and her children moved in with Bruce Miller, finding the stability she craved. Bruce Miller's brother, Chuck Miller, said she thought Bruce Miller was the best thing that ever happened to her, finally having a normal life. However, Chuck Miller's wife was concerned about Sherry's overspending, maxing out credit cards and running out of available cash. Bruce Miller seemed unconcerned and largely ignored the issue. Sherry also worked, selling Mary Kay cosmetics to customers at home. Bruce Miller bought Sherry a computer to help monitor the account. In 1999, while using her home computer to research vacation destinations, Sherry stumbled upon adult chat rooms on the internet. Before social media and text messaging became popular, people often used online chat rooms to connect with others. Some of these chat rooms had adult content and allowed users to anonymously flirt and engage in virtual relationships. Bruce Miller knew that Sherry had been flirting with other people in these online chat rooms. However, he considered this behavior harmless and chose to trust her, not wanting to create tension in their marriage. Sherry quickly became comfortable in the virtual world, regularly logging into chat rooms and sharing her deepest desires with strangers under various pseudonyms. One of the men Sherry met online was Jerry Cassidy, who used the pseudonym Rena Dudes. Jerry was born on October 6, 1960, in Kansas City, Missouri, having been married, raised a son, and enjoyed deer hunting with his brothers. Jerry also had aspirations of becoming an FBI agent. Later, after becoming a police officer, Jerry exposed corruption in the police department by reporting falsified records to a colleague. However, this decision resulted in him being demoted and eventually forced to resign after 9 years of service. Despite doing the right thing, after losing his career, Jerry suffered from depression and began to abuse alcohol and drugs. During this period, his marriage fell apart. However, he managed to pick himself up and moved to Reno, Nevada, where he took a job as a security guard at Harrah's Casino. In his spare time, he frequented online chat rooms, where he eventually met Sherry. Jerry and Sherry began exchanging messages, which led to a face-to-face meeting in Reno in July 1999. Sherry attended a Mary Kay convention with a friend, using it as an opportunity to meet Jerry in person. Their online romance quickly turned into a physical relationship, giving Jerry hope that his life was about to improve. Sherry presented herself as a wealthy businesswoman who was married to a disabled man and was seeking a discreet sexual encounter. Jerry believed her story. Jerry was deeply infatuated with Sherry, telling his friend Carol Slaughter that she was extremely active in the bedroom. During the summer and fall, Sherry used her cosmetics business as a cover for secret trips to Reno, where she would meet Jerry. When they were apart, they exchanged sexually explicit messages and videos over the internet. They even went so far as to rename their online accounts, with Sherry calling herself Jerry's Fool and Jerry calling himself Sherry's Fool. Despite being an ex-cop, Jerry failed to see the warning signs, blinded by the affectionate emails. It seemed like Jerry was an easy target for Sherry. She quickly convinced Jerry that he needed to kill her husband. Those who knew Jerry noticed a significant change in him under her influence. In September, Sherry announced to Jerry that she was pregnant with his child. What Jerry did not know, however, was that Sherry had had a tubal ligation in 1995 and was unable to have children. Despite this, Sherry told Jerry that her husband, Bruce Miller, had discovered the pregnancy and beaten her, causing her to miscarry. Sherry then announced that she was pregnant again, this time with twins. Believing her lies, Jerry begged Sherry to leave her husband, take their supposed future children, and live with him. Sherry revealed that she could not leave her husband Bruce Miller because of his mafia ties, and she feared for her and Jerry's lives. During this time, Jerry got into trouble and was arrested at a casino for being drunk and disorderly. Their online communication stopped while Jerry was in custody. After his release, Jerry decided to protect Sherry from her husband by creating distance. Jerry returned to his family in Missouri, and the couple maintained their relationship through online chat rooms. Sherry continued to update Jerry, sharing photos of her pregnancy. Jerry was eager to believe it. However, on November 5, 1999, Jerry received an email purportedly from Bruce Miller stating that he knew about the pregnancy and vowed to prevent the child from being born. Concerned, Jerry tried to contact Sherry, who eventually sent him a text saying she needed to leave for a few days and would contact him later. The next day, Jerry received another text from Bruce Miller claiming that he had pressured Sherry into having an abortion. The text included pictures of Sherry, beaten and bruised. Jerry believes that Bruce Miller killed his unborn twins. Angry and grief-stricken, Jerry blames Bruce Miller for the deaths of his 3 children, including the twins, and the abuse of Sherry. On November 8, Jerry confided in Sherry that he could no longer continue the situation. Jerry was going to kill her husband, Bruce Miller. The couple then devised a plan to kill Bruce Miller, mapping out the route, parking, location, and best time to dispose of the body. Jerry drove from his home to Michigan to carry out the plan. That evening, as Bruce Miller was getting ready to leave work, Sherry called him and told him to pick up pizza on the way home, as planned. Jerry was waiting, and when Bruce Miller showed up, Jerry shot Bruce Miller with a 20-gauge shotgun. After the murder, Jerry returned home, and Sherry began the next part of her plan. She called Bruce Miller's brother, Chuck Miller, expressing concern about her husband being gone for so long and asked him to check on Bruce Miller at the junkyard. When Chuck Miller arrived, he found Bruce Miller lying dead in a pool of blood. Witnesses reported that Bruce Miller had been shot in the chest at close range with a shotgun. When his wife Sherry heard the news, she began screaming and crying. Police found no evidence of a suspect. They discovered that Bruce Miller often carried large amounts of cash and initially suspected his death was the result of a robbery because his wallet was missing. None of the leads came up and the case was soon closed. Meanwhile, according to Bruce Miller's sister, Judy Miller, Sherry's behavior was not that of a grieving wife. 2 days after Bruce Miller's death, Sherry was spotted dancing at a bar in Otisville, Michigan. Within 2 weeks, she had found a new partner, Jeff Foster, a local delivery boy, and her relationship with Jerry was over. However, Jerry had hope. After killing Bruce Miller, he and Sherry would be together. But Sherry began to distance herself from Jerry. A month after the murder, she brought her new boyfriend, Jeff Foster, into her home and broke things off with Jerry, leaving him heartbroken. At this point, Jerry probably realized he had unjustly taken a life and was haunted by guilt. Jerry began to investigate, and he discovered that Sherry had lied and fabricated the whole thing. 3 months later, on February 11, 2000, Jerry committed suicide in his apartment in Odessa, Missouri, with a .22 caliber rifle. His body was found sitting with an open Bible on his lap. Jerry had condemned himself, accepted his guilt, and executed himself. Jerry's mother revealed in an interview that while cleaning the apartment, she accidentally found a briefcase hidden under the bed. Outside the briefcase was an envelope, and inside, they found 3 suicide notes. The contents of the letters indicate that Jerry confessed to killing Bruce Miller because he believed that Bruce Miller had abused Sherry and killed Jerry's 3 unborn children. However, the letters also made it clear that Sherry had lied to Jerry about the acts that Sherry had accused Bruce Miller of. In the letter, Jerry said that he went there and killed Bruce Miller. At the time, he was stupid and didn't realize the consequences of his actions. Now the truth about his depression is finally coming to light. He couldn't share his secret with anyone, and it consumed him. The truth is that Sherry wanted her husband dead so she could get the money. She got what she wanted, but she will soon learn that her actions will have consequences. He now understood that Sherry's actions were all a ruse. She had no qualms about hurting people. To back up his claim, Jerry provided transcripts of their text conversations. In between their intimate exchanges, Sherry had coached Jerry on how to locate dumpsters, where to park without being detected, and other important details. On February 22, 2000, the Jerry family's attorneys contacted the Jesse County Sheriff's Department with this new information. The police waited for Sherry Miller at the airport as she returned from a trip to Reno with her boyfriend, Jeff Foster. Sherry was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Police described Sherry as a skilled manipulator who tricked her lover into killing her husband under false pretenses. Despite overwhelming evidence against her, Sherry maintained her innocence to her husband Bruce Miller's family. Her trial began on December 12, 2000, in Michigan, attracting national attention due to the internet-related crime. The prosecution presented thousands of text messages between Sherry and Jerry, exposing her deception. According to the prosecution, Sherry's motive for wanting her husband Bruce Miller dead was financial gain. However, the defense argued that Sherry only received a minimal amount of money after Bruce Miller died. The defense argued that Jerry, acting as a jilted lover, fabricated evidence against Sherry. Sherry maintained that the nature of their online communications was purely imaginative and not based on fact. Furthermore, she admitted to lying about her pregnancy, saying her intention was to help relieve Jerry's depression. She also admitted to falsely claiming abuse in order to convince Jerry to stop contacting her. Sherry adamantly denied writing the messages describing the crimes, instead claiming that Jerry, a former homicide detective, created them using his expertise. However, evidence of these messages was discovered on Sherry's computer. Sherry Miller was found guilty on December 22 and received a life sentence for the murder charge, as well as a 54 to 81-year sentence for conspiracy. In 2007, while incarcerated, Sherry was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health conditions. She began treatment, filed an appeal, and even got married for the 4th time. Michael DeNoia was drawn to Sherry's story after seeing it on the news. Michael contacted her and they began corresponding. In 2008, Michael visited Sherry in prison and proposed to her. Although reports claim they were married in April 2008, there is no concrete evidence to support this. Sherry's fortunes changed when she won an appeal in 2008, resulting in her release from prison in 2009. A federal judge overturned her conviction, ruling that Jerry's suicide letter was inadmissible as evidence because it couldn't be scrutinized through cross-examination. The judge ordered a new trial and set bail, allowing Sherry to be released. In 2012, Sherry was sent back to prison to resume serving her original sentence after the court re-evaluated the admissibility of Jerry's suicide letter. Having spent 3 years outside, Sherry continued to maintain her innocence. In 2016, Sherry sent a 4-page typewritten letter to a district judge, abruptly confessing to her role in Bruce Miller's death. The sudden admission stunned everyone, as it was thought that Sherry would never voluntarily take responsibility. In the letter, Sherry wrote, "A pivotal moment came when she was forced to return to prison after 3 years of freedom. She had been living with her daughter and granddaughter, and she begged her daughter not to come with her when she was sent back to prison. However, her daughter refused to listen. As she walked through the prison doors, she turned around and saw her daughter crying, screaming, 'No, Mom, no, don't go.' It was then that she realized the devastation her crime had caused Bruce Miller and Bruce Miller's loved ones, including Jerry and his family." In a public interview in 2022 on a popular television channel, Sherry made some shocking confessions. She said that Bruce Miller had no connections to the mafia and had never abused her. Instead, she admitted that she used makeup to fake bruises and created fake ultrasound scans to trick Jerry. According to her, her motive was not financial gain. She claimed that she was afraid that Bruce Miller would discover her true nature. Sherry stated that sharing her story publicly helped her find some inner peace. However, she still struggles with guilt and shame, admitting it's difficult to look at herself in the mirror knowing what she did. After waiting for an opportunity to reveal the truth and find some sense of peace, Sherry remains imprisoned at the Huron Valley Women's Complex in Michigan. Sherry Miller has been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Karen Oviedo. Rolando Angel Aquino was born in 1987 in Bolivia. As the eldest of 7 siblings, he learned the importance of family bonds and hard work from an early age. He dreamed of having a happy family filled with the joy and laughter of children. In his youth, he met Carolina Chavez and she bore him a son. Even though they divorced, they still maintain a good relationship. Then Soledad Garcia entered his life and they had another son named Elias. Although the relationship with Soledad did not last long, Rolando remained a devoted and caring father to his children. He still kept in touch and maintained warm relationships with Carolina and Soledad. From an early age, Rolando was very active and passionate about sports, including football, and he played for a local team. Friends and family described him as kind and very hardworking. He got along well with his neighbors and was known for being exceptionally sociable. During a local soccer match, Rolando was attracted to Karen. Rolando and Karen soon developed a romance. A chance meeting led to true happiness. In 2016, Rolando and Karen lived together and opened a business at home. Karen was born on March 30, 1990, and grew up in Manado. Famous for being extroverted and open-minded, Karen always wanted to have a happy family. Before meeting Rolando, she married Rul, and then she and Rul had 2 beautiful daughters. However, over time, their marriage began to deteriorate. Financial difficulties were the main cause of their arguments, and they soon divorced. Rolando and Karen's lives passed peacefully, but a tragedy occurred. In the summer of 2019, Rolando's son, 9-year-old Elias, came to Rolando's house to visit him in the afternoon. That evening was filled with laughter from Elias, Rolando, and even Karen. However, the next morning, July 12, 2019, Rolando noticed that Elias was not feeling well. Rolando quickly contacted the family of his ex-wife, Soledad, and quickly took his son to the children's hospital. When Elias was transported to the hospital, pediatricians realized that Elias's condition was critical, requiring immediate transfer to the intensive care unit. Despite the efforts of medical staff, Elias died shortly after arriving at the hospital. What was puzzling was that Elias arrived at his father's house in completely normal health. Medical reports revealed that Elias died of third-degree poisoning, leading to multiple organ failure and cerebral thrombosis. This left Rolando and his ex-wife, Soledad, completely devastated. Doctors recommended additional forensic examinations. However, Soledad and Elias's grandmother refused the procedure. Karen then offered to cremate the boy's body, but Soledad instead chose to bury him in a private cemetery. Elias's death left Rolando completely anguished. He was greatly saddened by the sudden passing of his youngest son. Karen, caring and loving, was always by Rolando's side. She arranged everything, supported her boyfriend, and helped him overcome his pain and grief. Over time, with Karen's warmth and care, Rolando's pain began to ease. 16 months later, Rolando proposed to Karen. They got married, and Rolando believed that she would always be with him. However, their happiness was short-lived. Karen's life took a different turn on February 6, 2022, when she returned home from a gym session to find her husband Rolando extremely unwell. The next day, a medical ambulance was seen outside their home. 35-year-old Rolando had collapsed in the living room after vomiting violently. Emergency medical services quickly arrived, and Rolando was taken to Santa Maria Clinic. The medical team's efforts to save Rolando were ultimately unsuccessful. Rolando died on February 9 from severe poisoning. When medical staff began questioning Karen, they learned that Rolando had been taking medication for skin discoloration. However, this information only increased their suspicions. Closer examination of Rolando's body revealed an overdose of calcium oxalate crystals, which were often a sign of ethylene glycol poisoning, commonly used in automotive antifreeze. This mysterious and unexpected death led to an investigation into Rolando's death, and the authorities were determined to get to the bottom of it. The prosecutor's office questioned Rolando and Karen's neighbors, who revealed that Karen had repeatedly given her husband an unknown drug. Although Karen initially claimed it was a cure for Rolando's skin blemishes, neighbors remained suspicious, which led investigators to look into Karen. During the investigation, Karen was thoroughly questioned about the events surrounding her husband's death. Many conflicts arose during her interrogation. When asked about the substance she gave her husband before he died, Karen confirmed that it was a medicine to treat dark spots on her skin that she used through an intravenous infusion. However, she could not provide the potion because the housekeeper had thrown it away. Further investigation led to an interview with the housekeeper, Claudia Cortez, who contradicted Karen's statement about the disposal of the jar. Claudia also said she overheard a conversation between the couple in which Rolando expressed dissatisfaction with the medication he was taking. As a result, Karen was detained by the police and her cell phone was confiscated for further investigation. Rolando's sudden death shocked his family, friends, and teammates. Rolando's ex-wife, Karen's ex-husband, was especially stunned by rumors that Rolando's death might have been an act of intentional poisoning. Further investigation revealed disturbing evidence. A search of Karen's phone revealed she had researched the most dangerous toxins online and had found a way to delete her search history. Additionally, records showed she had ordered ethylene glycol, a toxic substance used in the manufacture of antifreeze, from an online store on 2 separate occasions. This substance is odorless, has a sweet taste, and is extremely dangerous to humans. Based on preliminary forensic results and collected evidence, the prosecutor's office charged Karen with intentionally poisoning Rolando. It is believed that she mixed the toxic substance with the orange juice that Rolando drank, causing his health to seriously decline and ultimately leading to his death. By mid-February, evidence against Karen had been collected, and Karen had been charged with capital murder. At the same time, investigators had begun looking into suspicious circumstances surrounding the death of 9-year-old Elias. A thorough investigation into Elias' medical history had been initiated by the prosecutor's office. According to the boy's mother, Elias had been in good health until he suddenly fell into a coma at his father's house and never recovered. Elias's death certificate had stated that his body had suffered from cerebral thrombosis. However, investigators had found this explanation suspicious, especially since Elias had been young and he had been in good health. As part of the investigation, the prosecutor's office had requested information about any purchases of ethylene glycol. Karen had been found to have purchased the poison on July 2, 2019, just before Elias had arrived at Aquino's residence. Relatives of Elias had also provided valuable information, revealing that Karen had urged the boy's body to be cremated, but his biological mother had instead chosen a traditional burial. These findings had been enough for prosecutor Claudia Rios to file more serious murder charges against Karen, accusing her of poisoning Elias. A judge had then ordered Karen detained pending trial on March 14. After she had tried to appeal the decision, the judge had overruled her, concluding that Karen would have to remain in detention until the trial began. Karen's highly publicized trial had begun on November 28, 2022, at Mendoza Criminal Court, attracting widespread public and media attention. Two separate indictments had been pending against Karen, one for the murder of Elias, headed by prosecutor Fernando Guto, and another for the murder of Rolando, headed by Claudia Rios. During the trial, Javier Aquino, Rolando's 15-year-old son, had appeared as the plaintiff, along with his lawyer. Prosecutor Fernando had presented the case, accusing Karen of poisoning Elias and Rolando by mixing ethylene glycol with orange juice, leading to severe poisoning and death. Karen's defense team had disputed the charges, claiming Rolando had a history of violence and abuse of their client. They had asserted that there had been no reliable evidence to support the allegations and that Karen had had no motive for murder. The defense had questioned why Karen would have killed Elias, who had posed no threat to her. They had also pointed out that Karen had been the sole owner of the house, car, and business, and that she had not made any suspicious purchases using her phone. Furthermore, the defense had argued that if Karen had used ethylene glycol to poison Elias, as the prosecutor had claimed, then her search for information about the poison on the internet would have made no sense. The defense had emphasized that although the deaths of Rolando and Elias had been heinous crimes, it had been necessary to clearly prove Karen's guilt before prosecuting her. Karen's defense team had tried to claim the allegations against her had been false. Karen had said that Rolando had bought the antifreeze by hacking into her account, instead of buying it herself. Additionally, Karen had claimed to have had an alibi for the day her husband had been poisoned on February 6, saying she had not been home when he had first shown symptoms. As the trial had continued, the prosecution had asked Karen a number of questions. An important point addressed by prosecutor Fernando had been whether Karen had offered to cremate her deceased son, Rolando. Karen had firmly replied that she had had no say in the matter and had never suggested cremation. The prosecution presented relatives of Rolando as witnesses to provide more insight into the events surrounding the death. Elias's mother, Soledad, testified that after her son's death, Rolando told her that Karen had suggested cremating Elias's body so both families could keep his ashes. However, Soledad refused this idea. She also shared her memories of meeting Rolando at the cemetery, where he mentioned Karen's jealousy. According to Soledad, Karen's jealousy was so intense that she and Rolando slept in separate beds. Another witness, Carolina, the mother of Rolando's first child, confirmed that Rolando and Karen slept separately, as her ex-husband had told her. Although Carolina had not interacted with Karen before the incident, Karen called her on the morning of February 8 to inform her that Rolando was in the hospital due to illness. Karen claimed that Rolando had probably taken some medication and was feeling unwell. She also asked Carolina to help her unlock Rolando's cell phone, suspecting that he was having an affair. Carolina was shocked to hear about Rolando's condition, as they had met just a few days prior and he seemed fine. After speaking with Karen, Carolina learned that Rolando had taken medication for skin blemishes, which caused an allergic reaction. The trial continued with doctors and experts presenting crucial forensic evidence and the results of a psychological examination to the jury. This new information shed light on previously overlooked details. Dr. Ivana Marinelli, a pediatrician who treated Elias in July 2019, explained how the boy was rushed to the hospital with severe breathing difficulties and required immediate intubation. A CT scan revealed a deep cerebral thrombosis, and Elias received intensive care. Dr. Ivana confirmed that Elias's symptoms were consistent with ethylene glycol poisoning, including impaired consciousness, restlessness, and a coma accompanied by a blood clotting disorder. The jury also reviewed the results of Karen's psychological examination, which was conducted at the prosecution's request. The experts found that Karen had lied and concealed the truth. The examination revealed that Karen showed no emotional response to her husband's death, raising doubts about her sincerity. The prosecutor questioned whether Karen had truly been a victim of domestic violence as she had claimed in her statement. This information provided insight into Karen's psychological profile. After weeks of waiting and many court hearings, the trial was finally over. The jury delivered a unanimous verdict after a lengthy period of silence and anticipation. Karen was found guilty of murdering Elias with exceptional cruelty and of causing Rolando's death through a particularly heinous process. As a result, she was sentenced to life in prison. Karen had attempted to evade punishment for the brutal murders that shocked the community and left many unanswered questions. Her plan to cremate the victims' bodies was likely a last-ditch effort to avoid accountability. However, the court and jury remained resolute, ultimately rendering a fair and just verdict. Karen's decision to harm her loved ones remains a puzzle. Despite having everything for a happy life, her motivations may be rooted in emotions like jealousy. This tragic case reminds us that even close relationships can conceal dark secrets, and genuine love and loyalty should always be the top priority. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ingrid Line. Ingrid Line was born on August 2, 1975. She lived in Renton, Washington, just outside Seattle, with her 3 young daughters. Ingrid was a nurse at Swedish Medical Center in Seattle. She balanced her career with taking care of her young children. After divorcing Philip Line, who was also the father of her children, they agreed to share parenting responsibilities. Although divorced, Ingrid and Philip still maintained a friendly relationship to effectively raise their daughter together. Ingrid's world revolved around her daughters, Noelle, 10, Brooke, 8, and Reese, 6. She was devoted to their safety and happiness, willing to sacrifice whatever was necessary. On April 9, 2016, Philip Line visited Ingrid at their residence in Renton, Washington, in a visit intended to care for their children together. Philip was sure that Ingrid would be home to welcome him. But when he arrived at the house, Philip was unable to reach Ingrid by phone, so he then contacted Ingrid's mother, Jorga, for support. Jorga and Philip entered Ingrid's house using Jorga's key and began searching for Ingrid. They found Ingrid's wallet, phone, and other personal items, including her driver's license, but no sign of Ingrid. It seemed unusual for her to leave without telling anyone. Worried, Jorga decided to report Ingrid missing to the authorities. As the investigation progressed, police spoke to Ingrid's friends and neighbors, eventually learning that she had mentioned going on a date with a man the night before. A neighbor also mentioned that Ingrid had recently started seeing a man named John, which was news to Jorga and Philip. Ingrid and Jorga had previously shared phone accounts, allowing Jorga to access Ingrid's call logs. When reviewing the logs, Jorga discovered that Ingrid had made multiple calls to a number registered in Montana. Jorga became suspicious and looked up the phone number online and discovered it was linked to John Robert Charlton's Facebook account. Concerned for Ingrid's safety, Jorga sent a text message to the number on Saturday, saying she had contacted 911 to report her daughter missing. John Charlton replied, looking surprised and asking what was going on. He explained that he and Ingrid had attended a Mariners game the previous day but then broke up because Ingrid needed to take care of her children early the next morning. Even though Jorge was repeatedly asking him to talk to the police, John Charlton refused to stop responding. The case reached a new turning point on April 9th, when a Seattle resident named Mike Novasio placed an emergency call to authorities. Mike reported that when he returned home, he noticed one of his recycling bins had an unusual weight, which had been left outside for collection on April 7th. Mike had noticed something was wrong and had decided to investigate. When he had opened the trash can, he had been shocked to find 3 clear plastic bags, one of which had appeared to contain human remains, which was why he had immediately called the authorities. When the police and medical examiner had arrived, they had carefully examined the contents of the bags. Inside, they had found a human head, a foot, an arm, and a leg. Although the remains had shown no signs of decomposition, facial features had still been recognizable, allowing them to identify the remains as those of Ingrid. In the following days, more of Ingrid's remains had been found. Some had been discovered at a recycling facility, while others had been found in coolers at another location. Unfortunately, not all of Ingrid's remains had been found. During a search of Ingrid's home, police had found tickets to a Mariners game on her laptop dated April 8th. It had been believed that Ingrid and John had attended the game scheduled for 7:10 p.m. on April 11th. As a result, John had been arrested and taken for questioning. During interrogation, John had admitted knowing Ingrid and said they had been dating for about a month after meeting online. He had usually spent the night at her place. But on this particular night, he hadn't because her children would be home the next day. John had claimed that he had gone to a bar with Ingrid after the Mariners game and then driven back to her home in Renton in her car. He had said he had been very drunk and didn't remember much of what had happened after that. He had remembered having sex with Ingrid and her acting strangely, but his memory of the rest of that night had been unclear. When asked what he had done afterward, John had said he wasn't sure, but he had thought he might have slept on a sidewalk in downtown Seattle and woken up there the next morning. He guessed that Ingrid had dropped him off downtown before leaving. John had told authorities he was struggling with alcoholism and had no fixed residence. A physical examination had been conducted and John's injuries had been documented with photographs. He had had scratches on his left hand and forehead, cuts on his mouth and chin, and scratches on his chest. His ex-girlfriend had said she had seen him on April 9th and had noticed his lip was swollen and injured. John had explained his injuries by saying he had been robbed, but this had aroused suspicion among investigators due to John still having his wallet. Ingrid's car had been found by law enforcement in Belltown, a neighborhood near Seattle, on April 20th. However, this discovery raised a contradiction with John's original statement. John had claimed that Ingrid had dropped him off in downtown Seattle and then had driven back home, but evidence from the car had shown otherwise. Police had discovered trash bags in the car that were identical to the bags containing Ingrid's body parts. 3 fingerprints on the driver's door handle had matched John's, leading to his arrest on suspicion of having killed Ingrid and having stolen her car. John's arrest had been based largely on circumstantial evidence. Despite this, he had pleaded not guilty, and his defense team had argued that there had been no direct physical evidence linking him to Ingrid's murder. Initially denying involvement, John had eventually changed his plea to guilty before the trial had begun. During court proceedings, the prosecution had alleged that John had strangled Ingrid at her home and then had used a pruning saw to dismember her body in the bathtub. John had allegedly dumped Ingrid's body in multiple locations in Seattle. At her residence, police had found a nearly empty package of plastic bags identical to those containing her body. In the bathroom, authorities had discovered a 15-inch pruning saw, suspected to have been the tool used to dismember her body. They had also found human remains underneath the bathtub during their investigation. John had been sentenced to just over 27 years in prison, the maximum sentence allowed under state sentencing discretion. However, Judge Julie Spector had wanted to impose a life sentence because John's actions had been too serious. When given the opportunity to speak, John had apologized to the court and Ingrid's family and had said that he truly regretted his evil and cruel behavior. John had had a long history of run-ins with the law, including convictions for serious crimes such as aggravated robbery, felony theft, and assault. He had also been arrested for theft. However, it had been his behavior at home that had worried his parents the most. In 2006, John's parents had felt threatened by their son's actions and had obtained a temporary protective order against him. According to court records, John had been struggling with the pressures of life and had been experiencing psychological instability. On March 2, 2006, he had been drunk and aggressive, trying to fight with his parents at his home. His behavior, not only in words but also in actions, had posed a threat to their safety. John's parents had been concerned about his possible cocaine use and his tendency to hold grudges for years. They had also noticed that when he had been drunk or on drugs, he had become scary, making them fear for their safety. One incident that stands out is when John had forced his mother to watch the movie Hannibal and had warned her to watch this and be careful. This behavior had been disturbing and had added to their concerns. Despite initial concerns, John's parents had eventually asked that the protective order be withdrawn. Following Ingrid's murder, the grief experienced by her family and friends had been immense, reflecting the loss of a caring mother, daughter, and friend. In the wake of Ingrid's tragic death, the community had come together to support her family, demonstrating strength through adversity. Ingrid's memory would continue to live on in the hearts of those who had known and loved her. Her story served as a reminder to prioritize safety and caution when meeting people online. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Neil Entwistle. Neil Entwistle was born on September 18, 1978, in Worksop, Nottinghamshire, England, to Clifford and Yvonne Entwistle. He grew up in a humble home with his younger brother, Russell. His father worked as a coal miner before becoming a labor counselor, while his mother worked as a cook in a school cafeteria. After finishing high school, Neil Entwistle enrolled in the University of York, where he studied electronic engineering and business management. During this time, Entwistle met an American student named Rachel Souza who was attending York as a study abroad student. Rachel was originally from the Kingston area in Massachusetts, had attended Silver Lake Region High School before going to Holy Cross College in Worcester. While studying abroad in York for a year, she met Neil Entwistle on the rowing team. Neil Entwistle was withdrawn, shy, and indecisive, rarely interacting with others. Rachel, on the other hand, exuded confidence, was cheerful, outgoing, and well-liked. Her American roots brought an undeniable charm to her personality, and Rachel was well received by the other members of the rowing team. Over time, Neil Entwistle and Rachel found themselves drawn to each other, eventually spending more and more time together. Benjamin Pryor, a close friend of Neil Entwistle and Rachel's since college, said the couple were very understanding, affectionate and caring towards each other. While Neil Entwistle worked at a defense and security technology company based in Malvern, Worcestershire, Rachel pursued a career in education after completing her studies in 2002. Rachel took up a teaching role in English, drama and theater studies at St. Augustine's Catholic High School in Redditch, nurturing young minds through the arts. In a post on Friends Reunited in June 2003, Neil Entwistle happily shared about his upcoming marriage to Rachel. They met through rowing, although he expressed dissatisfaction with life south of the border in Birmingham. He was happy with his upcoming marriage. In August 2003, Neil Entwistle and Rachel got married in 2 ceremonies, one in Plymouth, UK, and the other in Massachusetts, USA. After the US ceremony, they had a reception in the UK in November of the same year. Neil Entwistle shared the early days of their married life on a family website, including their Christmas 2004 trip to the Mediterranean. In April 2005, their daughter, Lillian Rose, was born. Neil Entwistle and Rachel decided to move to the United States. They initially lived with Rachel's mother and stepfather in Carver, Massachusetts, until they purchased their own home in Hopkinton on January 12, 2006. Their new home was located on a quiet cul-de-sac with only 8 neighbors, creating a peaceful setting close to a major city. Despite Neil Entwistle's efforts to find work as a computer programmer and IT specialist, he encountered difficulties in finding work, leading to financial stress and mounting debt. To ease the financial burden, Neil Entwistle turned to selling PC parts on eBay. However, his business was affected by customer complaints about undelivered orders, forcing eBay to investigate fraud. An investigation into Neil Entwistle's eBay activities uncovered that he was using multiple accounts under different names. Further investigation revealed that Neil Entwistle was involved in running a website called millimaker.co.uk. This website promoted a get-rich-quick scheme that promised to help people in the adult entertainment industry make a guaranteed $6,000 per month within 6 months. The website also claimed to offer 24/7 assistance. However, these claims ultimately led to the website being shut down. Neil Entwistle used online platforms to find sexual partners. He visited several websites to pursue relationships looking for sexual partners. On Adult Friend Finder, Neil Entwistle created a profile and emailed several women expressing his interest in meeting sexual partners. An investigation found incriminating evidence on Neil Entwistle's laptop. In his profile, Neil Entwistle stated that he was interested in meeting American women of different ages. Neil Entwistle also mentioned that he wanted to confirm whether American women were better in bed than women from other countries. Neil Entwistle's profile indicated that he was looking for a specific type of casual relationship and was open to meeting people with similar interests. Testimony at the trial revealed Neil Entwistle had continued his interest in escort services up to January 18, 2006. Online searches he conducted on Google included Blonde Bay Escort Service, Sex Escort Services Westboro, and Escort in Worcester. In their defense, Neil Entwistle's lawyers claimed that his wife, Rachel, was dissatisfied with their sex life. However, when reviewing Neil Entwistle's internet search history, it is revealed that Neil Entwistle had much darker motives than seeking out prostitutes and seeking relationships with other women. During this time, Neil Entwistle visited his father-in-law, Joe Matarazzo, in Carver, Massachusetts. Joe Matarazzo, a member of the Old Colony Sporting Club, had previously taught Neil Entwistle how to shoot. Neil Entwistle also had a .22 caliber revolver with Joe Matarazzo's family. However, on this occasion, Neil Entwistle planned to steal a gun from Joe Matarazzo's family. Neil Entwistle went to his in-laws' home, found a hidden gun, and took it back to his house in Hopkinton. Once home, he secretly hid the firearm, waiting for the right moment to carry out a violent act against his family. On January 20, 2006, Neil Entwistle entered the master bedroom of his home, where his wife, Rachel, and their 9-month-old daughter, Lillian, were sleeping in their new bed. Neil Entwistle shot Rachel in the head, and then shot Lillian, who was lying next to her. The bullet passed through Lillian's body and also hit Rachel in the left chest. Later that day, Neil Entwistle returned to Carver with the uncleaned weapon. He would later claim that he had gone shopping at Staples on that Friday and discovered his family dead when he got home. After leaving Carver, Neil Entwistle drove to Boston's Logan Airport on the evening of January 20, 2006. At the airport, he made 2 successful ATM withdrawals totaling $800, but 3 additional attempts to withdraw $420 were declined. The next day, January 21, 2006, Neil Entwistle bought a one-way ticket to London without checking any luggage. He boarded a British Airways flight that departed Boston at 8:15 p.m. that evening. Unbeknownst to Neil Entwistle, several neighbors he had invited for dinner, including Joanna Gatley and her sister Maureen, arrived at his home around 7 p.m. to find it locked with the lights on inside. Concerned for Rachel's safety, neighbors attempted to contact her mother, but were unable to reach her. They then called 911 at around 8:30. Police arrived at Neil Entwistle's home to search for clues about the missing family. Upon entering, Sergeant Michael Sutton observed the bedroom, noticing a large unmade bed, but nothing unusual. After completing their search, the police locked the house and left. However, Joanna Gatley and Maureen were still worried and decided to spend the night in the car outside the house, hoping that Rachel's family would return. To cope with the cold weather, they made several trips to the gas station restroom. The following Sunday morning, Joanna Gatley and Maureen gained entry to the house using the garage door code they had obtained from a next-door neighbor the night before. Inside, Joanna Gatley and Maureen discovered dishes and leftover food in the kitchen, indicating that the family had just finished eating. The bathtub was still full of water, indicating that the couple had bathed their infant daughter. They proceeded to the master bedroom, then to Lillian's bathroom, where classical music was playing, and finally checked the living room. Rachel's mother and stepfather then arrived at Rachel's house, and together they searched around the house. After assessing the situation, they decided to report the family missing to the Hopkinton Police Department. The police arrived at Rachel's house. Sergeant Sutton entered the basement and detected a foul odor. He followed the stench into the house to the master bedroom, where he found the bodies of Rachel and her infant child, Lillian. The mother's body was lying on a bed, covered in clothes. Rachel had her arms spread across Lillian's chest, both of them wearing pajamas. Autopsy results showed that Rachel died from a gunshot wound to the head, while Lillian was shot in the torso. DNA evidence was also found on the barrel of the gun and on the butt of the gun, belonging to Neil Entwistle. About 36 hours after returning to England, Neil Entwistle visited his parents, Cliff and Yvonne. He told them that he had been driving around and had spent the previous night in a hotel. During this visit, Neil Entwistle revealed to his parents that he had discovered the bodies of his wife and daughter. On January 23, 2006, Neil Entwistle had a 2-hour telephone conversation with Hopkinton Police, which was recorded. On January 26, 2006, U.S. law enforcement officials traveled to the UK to interview Neil Entwistle. The next day, after consulting with a lawyer at the U.S. Embassy in London, Neil Entwistle chose not to cooperate with the American detectives. Meanwhile, Rachel and her daughter Lillian were buried in Evergreen Cemetery in Kingston, Massachusetts, under the surname Souza, sharing a single grave. With around 500 people attending the funeral to pay their respects. However, Neil Entwistle was absent from the ceremony, and Neil Entwistle's name was not mentioned in the proceedings or inscribed on the headstone. Despite this, Neil Entwistle sent a bouquet of flowers, consisting of an orange rose and a white lily, with a note that read, "My orange roses and lilies forever," signed Sakoko. After returning to the UK, Neil Entwistle resumed his normal life in February 2006. However, the media continued to gather outside his parents' home in Worksop. Neil Entwistle went to Notting Hill for dinner with his old crew from York University, followed by a trip to the cinema. Just a week after the funeral, on February 8, 2006, the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office issued an arrest warrant for Neil Entwistle. The following day, February 9, 2006, Neil Entwistle was arrested by police at Royal Oak Station as he was about to board a train. Neil Entwistle was returned to the United States on February 15 and appeared in court, where he was denied bail and held at the Middlesex County Jail in Cambridge, Massachusetts. On March 28, 2006, Neil Entwistle was formally charged with murder and illegal possession of a firearm and ammunition. Neil Entwistle pleaded not guilty despite the charges against him. Almost a year after the incident, in December 2006, authorities at Middlesex County Jail found letters Neil Entwistle had written to his parents and lawyers. These letters showed that Neil Entwistle was depressed and might be thinking about killing himself. As a result, he was moved to Bridgewater Hospital for a psychiatric evaluation before being sent back to Middlesex County. Forensic psychiatrist Christopher Cordes believed that Neil Entwistle's behavior was caused by Asperger's syndrome, a view that was shared by Dr. David Holmes. After several delays, the process of choosing jurors for Neil Entwistle's trial at Middlesex Superior Court began in June 2008. The trial for the double murder of Neil Entwistle's wife and daughter began on June 2, 2008, in Juan, Massachusetts. Elliot Weinstein led the defense team for Neil Entwistle. During the trial, Elliot attempted to object to the prosecution's plan to introduce DNA evidence, but was unsuccessful. Elliot also attempted to suppress other evidence found in the family home, arguing that it was taken without a warrant, but this effort was also unsuccessful. Neil Entwistle chose not to call any witnesses or testify during the trial. Notably, Neil Entwistle showed little emotion throughout the proceedings. On June 25, 2008, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, convicting Neil Entwistle of 2 counts of first-degree murder, as well as unlawful possession of a firearm and ammunition. As a result, Neil Entwistle was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite the severe sentence, Neil Entwistle appeared calm as he left the courtroom. Neil Entwistle was incarcerated at the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center. In August 2008, he became the victim of a hoax when he shaved his head to seek protection from a white supremacist prison gang. However, instead of receiving protection, the gang threatened Neil Entwistle's life. After this incident, Neil Entwistle was placed in protective custody. He was then transferred to the Old Colony Correctional Center, a prison located in Bridgewater, Massachusetts, in December. The tragic death of Rachel and her infant daughter has left a lasting legacy of grief for the family and those who loved them. In the face of this tragic loss, the community has come together to support and comfort the grieving family. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Dawn Hatcheney. Dawn Marie Hatcheney was born on December 5, 1969, in Seattle, Washington. She is the eldest child and only daughter of Donald Hatcheney and Diana Parle. Her father worked in a shipyard, while her mother was a homemaker. Dawn grew up with her 3 brothers, Dennis, Darren, and Derek, in Bremerton, Washington. Dawn developed a strong faith from an early age. According to her mother, she accepted God into her life at the age of 4. However, her childhood was also challenging. Her parents struggled with anxiety and depression, which often led to frequent conflicts at home. When Dawn was about 11 years old, her mother, Diana, left the family for another man. This new relationship resulted in the birth of another child. However, the relationship did not last, and Diana eventually returned to the family, bringing her newborn child with her. Despite these hardships, Dawn did well in school. She worked hard to achieve good grades and overcome her challenges. Her hard work paid off when she entered the prestigious Scripps National Spelling Bee at age 12. This achievement not only led her to the White House, but also gave her the opportunity to meet former President Ronald Reagan. Dawn graduated as valedictorian from Bremerton Christian School in 1988 and then attended Northwest College of the Assemblies of God Church in Seattle. During her college years, she met Nick Hatcheney, and they quickly formed a close relationship. However, Dawn's friends were concerned when she called Nick her other half after only a few dates, as they worried that Nick's assertive personality might not be a good fit for her. They wanted Dawn to find someone who would be unwaveringly supportive and emotionally committed. Nick grew up in Poulsbo, Washington, and his childhood shared some similarities with Dawn's. However, his family life was difficult. His father, Dan, was often distant and busy with work, leaving Nick feeling neglected. Nick's mother, Sandra, was busy with home daycare and foster care, which left Nick feeling like he was not a priority to her. He even felt that his mother favored his biological siblings and adopted children over him, leading Nick to believe that she hated him. Nick struggled with the emotional distance between his parents, especially his mother's long-term depression and his father's lack of attention. As a result, Nick lacked emotional support and connection from his family, which had a profound impact on his life. Despite his isolation, Nick found comfort and faith in the Bible and Christianity, which boosted his confidence during his teenage years but occasionally led to social isolation due to his growing self-assurance. Nick and Dawn first met in college. Initially, Dawn's friends found it strange that she liked Nick because his personality was completely different from hers. She was outgoing and confident, while Nick was not. However, as Dawn spent more time with Nick, she began to change. She was no longer the confident, independent, and driven person she once was. Instead, she became shy and indecisive, often agreeing with Nick's decisions even when they were not right for her. Although their relationship seemed unhealthy, their love for each other remained strong. Nick proposed to Dawn on Alki Beach in 1990, and they were married on April 20, 1991. As newlyweds, they moved to Bremerton, where Dawn worked as a loan officer and Nick became a youth pastor at Christ Community Church on Bainbridge Island near Seattle. Nick had always aspired to be a youth pastor at Christ Community Church, where he had previously had a good relationship with a pastor named Smith. However, Nick gradually drifted away from Smith when he found doctrinal agreement with Pastor Robert Billy Craig. Robert saw in Nick as nothing more than a tool to carry out his plan to overthrow Smith and take complete control of the church as senior pastor. Meanwhile, in 1997, Dawn and Nick faced housing problems due to frequent moves, living in houses they had renovated and sold. Dawn dreamed of having a family and a stable life. To solve this problem, Nick found a house in need of repair in East Bremerton and planned to move in, renovate it, and make it their home. However, the purchase and repair of the house put Nick and Dawn in debt. Although their relationship appeared perfect, with Dawn being Nick's supportive and accommodating wife, there were hidden problems that no one saw. Dawn even joked that if she and Nick broke up, Nick would stay with her instead of moving back to his parents' house. Meanwhile, Nick continued to borrow money from church members, putting him further into debt. He embarked on an ambitious project to start a Christian youth camp. Although the project was financially taxing, Nick committed to it because he had a strong desire to do so. Nick's story was closely related to Sandy Glass, a parishioner of Christ Community Church. When Nick was trying to find the right land to build his youth camp, Sandy confirmed once again that he had great ambitions. Sandy Glass's life had been full of ups and downs. She had faced many hardships in her life. Her first boyfriend died of an unknown illness, her father died in a construction accident, and her brother struggled with drug addiction. She married Jimmy, a carpenter, but their financial situation was strained because the family depended entirely on Jimmy's income while Sandy stayed home to care for the children. Sandy also struggled with her spending habits, often living beyond her means. This led to frequent arguments between her and Jimmy. These arguments sometimes caused Jimmy to express his frustration by yelling or withdrawing from the situation. To resolve their marital conflicts, Sandy and Jimmy sought help from the church and attended marriage counseling sessions coordinated by Nick. Nick had been the church's marriage counselor for many years. However, some parishioners filed complaints with Pastor Robert about Nick's counseling style. They were upset that Nick often asked personal questions and ignored other important issues. His discussions often focused on sexual issues, ignoring other aspects of marriage. Despite this, church members trusted Nick because he had the support of their former pastor, Smith. They felt that Nick would not have been entrusted with this role if he were not trustworthy. In the fall of 1997, Pastor Robert replaced Smith as senior pastor. Smith and his wife then left to do missionary work in Africa. Jimmy's parents, who were also church members, disagreed with his decision to seek church counseling. They were skeptical about Nick's qualifications and experience in guiding their son's marriage. When Nick focused primarily on Sandy, they became even more concerned because they felt he should focus on both of them equally. The relationship between Nick and Sandy went beyond the boundaries of a normal mentoring relationship. They spent too much time talking on the phone, meeting at church, and even outside. This made Jimmy's parents feel that their relationship was inappropriate as they interacted frequently and acted intimately. Pastor Robert's wife, Pamela, also noticed Nick's behavior and spoke to him privately. She expressed her concerns about his inappropriate behavior and advised him to focus on his own marriage. When complaints about Sandy and Nick's relationship arose, Robert had to intervene. He warned Sandy that her relationship with Nick was unacceptable and needed to end immediately. However, Sandy felt that she had a special connection with Nick. She wrote a letter to Robert, expressing her anger and frustration. In the letter, she stated that she felt Robert did not trust her. The relationship between Sandy and Nick had a negative impact on those around them. Dawn and Jimmy, along with Jimmy and Sandy's children, felt hurt by this. At one point, one of their children told Jimmy that Sandy and Nick had talked about Nick becoming their new father when Jimmy died. At church, Dawn began to share her grief with her friends. She told them about her financial situation and her desire to have children, but Nick was against the idea. By the end of 1997, Nick was romantically involved with several women besides Sandy. He spent time with them in private and on phone calls that lasted for hours. However, Sandy dreamed of the beautiful future she hoped to have with Nick. She encouraged him to invest more in the plan to open a youth camp and develop a romantic relationship with her. She believed that both of them were brought together by fate. A group of women in the congregation had tried to clear things up with Dawn, letting her know that the problems in her marriage with Nick had not been her fault, but rather Nick himself. However, her life had not turned out the way she had expected when she had married him. Back on Christmas, Dawn had woken up feeling unwell. Still, she and Nick had decided to visit her family and spend the day together. Later that evening, they had gone to Smith's house and spent time with his family. Early the next morning, the 26th, Nick had planned to go hunting with Lindsay Smith's daughter and her friends. Before leaving, Nick had met his friends at the Hood Canal Bridge in Jefferson County. After a few hours in the woods without catching anything, they had decided to return and have breakfast at a local diner around 9 a.m. While everyone was eating, Nick had suddenly become concerned and said that Dawn and he had not opened their Christmas presents. Around 9:30 a.m., Nick had left the diner and returned home. At 10 a.m., he had discovered that his wife had died in a fire. Investigators had discovered that the fire had initially started in Nick and Dawn's bedroom due to a faulty space heater. The space heater had burned fiercely and quickly spread due to the presence of newspapers and wrapping paper in the room. The situation had been made worse by the presence of multiple propane tanks on the floor. There had been a surprising detail in the story. Less than an hour earlier, Nick had told his friends at the diner that he and Dawn had not opened their Christmas presents. However, when he had spoken to the authorities, he had said that they had opened the presents the night before. Nick had explained that his wife, Dawn, had been feeling unwell and had gone to bed. He also had said he had received a propane tank as a Christmas gift. Because they had frequently renovated their home, they had to use a space heater during the winter. This type of heater often lacks modern safety features, leading to fires and deaths. The police had found no evidence that Nick's story had been false. As a local pastor, Nick had been well respected in the community and there had been no reason to suspect him of any involvement in his wife's death. Nick's congregation had tried to support him during what they had believed was a difficult time. Pastor Robert had suggested a way to try to ease Dawn's grief through prayer. However, Nick had rejected the idea, saying he had wanted Dawn to not experience any more pain. This rejection had surprised Pastor Robert, as Nick had previously been actively involved in church activities, including exorcisms. Mary Glass, Sandra's mother-in-law, had soon become suspicious of Nick's role in Dawn's death. She had thought that Dawn's death had not been an accident. She had urged her husband to contact the police to investigate, but this had not happened. Shortly thereafter, the police had determined that Dawn's death had been an accident and the case had been turned over to Nick's insurance company. Nick had received a large sum of money from his life insurance policy. This had been a bit strange to his friends and family, but they had later understood that Nick and Dawn's large debts and Nick's desire to build a youth camp had made him need the money. Some church members had found Nick's way of grieving for Dawn unusual, but they had not voiced their concerns because they had thought that people process grief differently. The church community then had held a celebration of Dawn's life, where family and friends had gathered to share stories about her and remember her life. During the celebration, Nick had shown remarkable composure throughout the funeral. Additionally, friends who had been helping clean Nick's house had discovered pictures of Dawn hidden in the back of a closet. This had suggested that Nick had wanted to remove memories of Dawn. Nick also had begun to show a cold and indifferent attitude towards many people, including some church members, neighbors, and friends. Nick's behavior had become even more suspicious when he had quickly developed a close relationship with Dawn's mother, Diana, under the guise of mourning his widowhood. This had shocked and outraged many. Even Pastor Robert could not stand Nick's behavior and had asked him to leave Christ Community Church. This expulsion had been a huge blow to Nick and marked the beginning of troubles in his life. On April 10, 2001, Sandy and her attorney met with the district attorney to negotiate her plea. In exchange for immunity, she had to reveal a secret that had been kept since the morning of December 26. Sandy recounted that on the morning of Dawn's death, Nick contacted her and said, "I did it." However, the conversation was interrupted by another call from the church informing her of Dawn's death. After the call ended, Sandy turned to Nick to clarify what he meant, but Nick simply said, "It's over, it's over." After several weeks, Sandy confronted Nick. At this point, he confessed to his crime. He had overdosed Dawn with Benadryl and then covered her face with a plastic bag to suffocate her. Dawn was still semi-conscious and had to watch as Nick murdered her. After making sure Dawn was dead, Nick arranged the crime scene to make it look like an accidental fire. He placed old newspapers and wrapping paper around the room underneath Dawn's body and placed propane tanks near the bed. He also arranged the fireplace to cause a fire in order to erase any evidence of his crime. Dawn's autopsy revealed no soot or carbon monoxide in her lungs or blood. However, this result did not accurately reflect reality because Dawn's red blood cells showed signs of carbon monoxide. The person in charge of Dawn's autopsy concluded that her death was an accidental fire, ignoring important evidence. One reason for this conclusion was that since Dawn was the wife of a pastor, it was thought that Dawn could not have been involved in any adulterous behavior. Although carbon monoxide bound to red blood cells, an autopsy revealed that Dawn did not inhale smoke. However, she had overdosed on the drug Benadryl, 5 times the normal dose. Some believe that this dose was not enough to cause respiratory failure. The pathologist also suggested that even if she had been asleep, Dawn would have reacted to the increased temperatures of the fire. Interestingly, crime scene photos showed newspapers underneath Dawn's body, but this detail was largely overlooked. Nick was finally arrested on September 12, 2001, in the Kinko's parking lot, and vehemently denied any involvement in Dawn's death. Nick still faced a first-degree murder charge. His bail was set at $750,000. Sandy's testimony to investigators added to the frustration with the police over the nearly 4-year delay in considering Nick a suspect or making an arrest. Sandy cooperated with investigators because she was angry that Nick had relationships with other women in the church and felt taken advantage of. She believed that God did not approve of their relationship and that therefore Dawn's murder was against God's will. Church members who were questioned described Nick's strange behavior and inappropriate relationships. They also expressed frustration that he did not buy Dawn a tombstone after receiving the life insurance money. On September 17, 2001, Nick appeared in court and pleaded not guilty. He alleged that the church had cursed him and that Pastor Robert was a much more evil influence than the police could understand. Nick's trial then began. Nick was initially charged with first-degree murder, but the charges were amended to aggravated first-degree murder, which carried a sentence of life in prison without parole. Witnesses who testified included women who had relationships with Nick and several church members who had confided in him. They provided information that helped the jury better understand Nick. They had shared details of experiences they believed involved visions and direct messages from God, but in reality, Nick had used these to rationalize and manipulate others. Smith's daughter testified, describing how she had been introduced to Nick through her father, and how Nick had taken advantage of her during her teenage years. The sexual relationship between her and Nick had begun shortly after Dawn had died and continued until she had moved away about a year later. Doctors and forensic experts had also testified, noting that Dawn's body had contained important clues regarding the events of that day. However, these clues had been ignored because Nick had been a pastor. Although there had been no signs of soot or carbon monoxide, which would have been unusual for a living, breathing person in a fire, the defense had vigorously contested these allegations. They had focused their efforts on portraying Nick's ex-partner, Sandy, as a jealous and vengeful man who had fabricated the accusations when he had discovered Nick's affairs with various women. On December 26, 2002, 5 years after Dawn's tragic death, the jury had deliberated for a day before finding Nick guilty of aggravated first-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing on February 7, 2003, Nick had addressed Dawn's friends and family, asserting his innocence but expressing remorse for his actions and sharing his sorrow for their loss. Nick had acknowledged that Dawn had deserved better treatment and had been sentenced to life in prison. However, in 2007, an appeal to the state Supreme Court had resulted in a modification of his sentence. The appeal had argued that the original charge of aggravated first-degree murder did not match Dawn's actual cause of death, as she had died from strangulation. The defense had argued that Nick did not deserve a life sentence. Ultimately, the state Supreme Court had ruled in favor of the appeal and commuted Nick's sentence to 26 years. Nick would be eligible for parole in 2025 and might be eligible for early release. Dawn had gone too soon, but not forgotten. She had chosen a life with someone she had trusted, but that had not come true. Sadly, that had led to betrayal and her heartbreaking death. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Els van Doren. Els van Doren was a 38-year-old Belgian woman married to Jan de Wilde, a jeweler. Together, they had 2 children, Vincent and Carol. Although he worked in his family's jewelry store, Els van Doren's real passion had been skydiving. She initially took up the sport with her husband in 1994, but she quickly overcame his interest as her passion for skydiving grew. Els van Doren was an experienced skydiver with 2,300 jumps. Every weekend and holiday, she spent time skydiving. In 1998, she began formation jumping, and in 2001, she became a member of an all-female skydiving team called the Divas. The team competed at the World Skydiving Championships in 2003. However, Els van Doren had to leave the team in 2004 due to a herniated disc. After recovering, Els van Doren decided to skydive more for fun than for competition. She joined the Zwartberg Parachute Club, where she met a fellow skydiver and close friend, Els Babs Klotmans, who was 26 years old and a school teacher. To avoid confusion within the club, Els van Doren suggested the nickname Babs for her young friend. Both women were acquainted with Marcel Summers, a member of the Zwartberg Parachute Club. As Els van Doren, Babs, and Marcel became acquainted, Els van Doren found herself developing a strong relationship with Marcel, which eventually became a romantic relationship. Even though she was married, Els van Doren was able to keep her relationship with Marcel a secret because her family was used to her spending weekends at the skydiving club. She often visited Marcel's apartment on weekends without arousing her husband's suspicion. What Els van Doren didn't know was that she not only shared a name with Babs, they also shared a man, Marcel. Unbeknownst to both Els van Doren and Babs, Marcel had been secretly hooking up with both of them, devising a plan to manage his time with each of them. Friday was for Babs, while Saturday was for Els van Doren. This arrangement worked for Marcel for a while, but it didn't last long. On Friday evening, November 10, 2006, something unexpected happened. As planned, Babs went to Marcel's residence for a weekly meeting, but what she didn't know was that Els van Doren had also decided to surprise Marcel that night. Babs and Marcel had just finished dinner and were returning to their apartment when they met Els van Doren, who was waiting outside the door. That night, Babs did not sleep in Marcel's bed as expected. Instead, she slept in a sleeping bag on the living room floor, while Marcel and her friend, Els van Doren, were in the bedroom. While in the living room, Babs noticed Els van Doren's parachute and skydiving equipment nearby. Feeling hurt and betrayed by her friend's actions, Babs acted in a way that would ultimately have devastating consequences. On November 18, 2006, 12 members of the skydiving club, including Els van Doren, Babs, and Marcel, boarded a flight over Flanders. Their plan was to jump in a four-person formation from 13,000 feet with Tom, another skydiver. During the jump, they would hold hands before leaving and opening their parachutes. Els van Doren and Tom jumped out of the plane as scheduled, but Babs seemed to have jumped a little late. As they free fell, Babs struggled to keep up with the group. At an altitude of 9,000 feet, Marcel, Els van Doren, and Tom decided to break formation to safely open their parachutes. That's when they realized something serious was going on. Els van Doren's parachute wouldn't open when she pulled the rope. Remaining calm, Els van Doren recalled her emergency training and remembered a previous experience where she had successfully deployed her reserve parachute after the main parachute failed. Els van Doren was plummeting towards the ground at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour, with only 20 seconds to perform an emergency maneuver to ensure a safe landing. Despite her best efforts, pulling the reserve parachute cord had no effect and the parachute could not open. In a state of panic, Els van Doren continued to pull both the main parachute rope and the backup parachute rope. But nothing happened. Marcel, at an altitude of 800 meters, witnessed Els van Doren's desperate struggle from afar. He was 300 meters above Els van Doren, who was only 500 meters above the ground, and he knew something was wrong because her parachute had not opened. However, he was powerless to intervene and could only watch in horror. In a last-ditch effort, Els van Doren tried to untangle her parachute in hopes of activating it, but it was too late. Her life ended. Meanwhile, in Upavbeek town, a woman was drying laundry in her garden when she heard a loud noise. She looked up and saw a person falling from the sky with a parachute, heading straight for her garden. This sight was not unusual as her house was located near a skydiving club and its landing strip. She suddenly noticed a piece of white cloth stuck to her bush. When she got closer, she saw a person lying in the bushes. She immediately called her husband, who was working in the garden, and they quickly called emergency services. Meanwhile, Marcel had landed safely and was desperately searching for Els van Doren. He spotted an ambulance and followed it to the scene where Els van Doren had landed. As he rushed towards her, he was restrained by the emergency team so they could work. Despite their efforts to resuscitate her, Els van Doren died. Marcel emphasized that Els van Doren's parachute was inoperable, pointing out that it was unusual for both the main and reserve parachutes to fail to open. He then contacted Els van Doren's husband, Jan, to tell him the news. Jan rushed to his wife's side, while Tom and Babs returned to the skydiving club to break the tragic news to the other members. The news was heartbreaking. Babs was overcome with grief, falling to her knees and crying in pain. Els van Doren's husband, Jan, went to the skydiving club to pick up her belongings. When he arrived, he met Babs, who offered to help him. However, Jan found it strange that Babs seemed to stand still with a strange grin on her face. She walked towards the dressing room with Jan following, but then suddenly locked the door, leaving Jan outside. After a long wait, Babs finally walked out carrying Els van Doren's belongings. At the scene of the accident, police found Els van Doren's parachute and helmet. The helmet had a camera that recorded her final jump. An autopsy was performed to see if Els van Doren's death was caused by any internal cause. Results showed no signs of alcohol or drugs, leading investigators to conclude that her death was a murder or suicide. This conclusion was based on the severe fractures and internal bleeding caused by the fall. Els van Doren's family suspected that she might have been murdered by someone in her own skydiving club, someone who knew how parachutes worked. As a result, club members were asked not to attend her funeral, but some of Els van Doren's close friends chose to ignore this request. The family's suffering became even greater when police revealed that Els van Doren had a secret affair with Marcel Summers that lasted more than 5 years. Jan was especially hurt when he learned that some of his club members knew about the affair, people he considered friends, but they all had kept quiet. What was even more painful was that Els van Doren had told her clubmates that she had divorced her husband, which was not true. Els van Doren had passed away just 1 day before her child Carol's 15th birthday. At the funeral, Carol gave a heartfelt speech, recalling how her family had prevented her mother from skydiving. They had longed for her to be with them, but Carol also admitted that her mother had been a unique person who wouldn't have been happy if she had given up what she loved. After the funeral, police began investigating the incident with Els van Doren's reserve parachute. They sent a skydiving expert to check the parachute and look for abnormalities. Experts quickly discovered a critical problem: the pilot chute, a small auxiliary parachute that helped deploy the main or reserve parachute, was missing. Obviously, someone had deliberately removed it. Experts also discovered that the main parachute activation cord and one of the cords connecting to the emergency parachute had been cut. During the final review of body cam footage of Els van Doren's fatal skydiving accident, an unidentified piece of red fabric was seen in front of her. Investigators were unable to identify the object as part of Els van Doren's equipment. They therefore asked Oplab residents to thoroughly search their garden and surrounding area for the piece of red cloth and warned them to handle it carefully if found, as it could be potential evidence containing the DNA of the person responsible for sabotaging Els van Doren's parachute. Unfortunately, no one was able to find the piece of fabric. A week after Els van Doren's death, a surprising discovery was made when Babs found the pilot chute. According to Babs, she had discovered the parachute hanging from a tree while driving between Oplab and Genk on the way back from Marcel's apartment. Instead of contacting the police directly, she told Marcel about the discovery. Marcel then called the police, who arrived at the location and found Babs visibly shaken and emotional. The police were skeptical of Babs' story, as they found it unusual that she had stumbled upon the pilot chute. Babs insisted it had been just a coincidence, explaining that she had taken a different route home and had been delayed by a slow-moving tractor. She said this delay had caused her to look up and see the parachute hanging about 20 meters above her, which she interpreted as a sign from Els Van Doorn. The police were suspicious because they knew that only investigators knew that the pilot had been missing. At that time, 3 people were the main suspects in Els Van Doorn's suspected murder case: her husband Jan, her lover Marcel, and her friend Babs. Police searched Marcel's residence and eventually identified him as a suspect. They later also cleared Jan as a suspect. They then searched Babs' home and confiscated items such as her phone, laptop, and diary. In her diary, she had written down her feelings following the advice of her psychiatrist. Later, Els Klotmans, also known as Babs, was questioned by the police about her relationship with Marcel and what had happened to Els Van Doorn. During the interrogation, Babs insisted she had had nothing to do with Els Van Doorn's parachute. She blamed Marcel, claiming that he had often taken care of Els Van Doorn's equipment when she stayed at his place on the weekends, or blamed Jan, claiming that Els Van Doorn had often left her belongings at his house during the week. After the initial interrogation, Babs was released and went home. However, she did not appear for a second interview scheduled for December 20, 2006. It was later discovered that that morning she had tried to take her own life by drinking a combination of sleeping pills and antidepressants. Her mother had found her unresponsive and immediately took her to the hospital for emergency treatment. Before attempting suicide, Babs had written letters to loved ones expressing her struggle to cope with the loss of her close friend and the extreme stress of being a suspect in a murder case. After recovering, Babs had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital for 15 days for close observation. This had not been her first attempt at self-harm, as she had previously been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression. Marcel ended their relationship, believing her actions had been more a call for attention than an actual attempt to commit suicide. He thought she had taken the pill just before her mother had been due to return home, suggesting her main goal had been to divert attention from suspicion of involvement in the murder of Els Van Doorn. Marcel thought the police had been trying to track down Babs and arrest her based on her lies. While still under psychiatric care, Babs had been arrested on January 11, 2007, as a suspect in the murder of Els Van Doorn. When Babs appeared in court on January 19, 2007, authorities decided that she would be detained while the investigation was ongoing. Authorities asked Babs to take a polygraph test, but she refused and it was never taken. A thorough examination of Els Van Doorn's parachute equipment had showed that someone had deliberately cut the parachute cord with scissors. The investigation revealed that the person responsible might have been right-handed. Babs spent 3 months in prison by March 2007, having to endure many interrogations. During questioning, she denied any wrongdoing but admitted sending anonymous letters to Els Van Doorn. The letter affirmed that Els Van Doorn's actions towards her family were wrong. Jan found the letter, but he interpreted it as a criticism of Els Van Doorn's frequent absences due to parachuting. However, Babs' intention had been to warn Els Van Doorn to end her relationship with Marcel. Babs also confessed to calling Marcel anonymously, especially when he had been with Els Van Doorn. She had intended to threaten them. Investigators analyzed Babs' automatic activation device, AAD, and discovered that Babs had jumped with the rest of the team and deployed her parachute beforehand. This supposedly allowed Babs to witness events unfold from above and monitor where Els Van Doorn's parachute would land. Babs could have landed and retrieved the parachute later. Babs' trial in the murder of Els Van Doorn began on September 24, 2010. Babs had been quickly arrested. The prosecution felt confident that they had enough evidence to prove Babs had committed murder. They believed Babs had been motivated by jealousy because she had discovered her lover, Marcel Summers, had been having an affair with her best friend, Els van Doren. Babs had previously told investigators that she knew Marcel preferred Els van Doren to her. The prosecution argued that Babs had wanted to eliminate Els van Doren as a rival. However, Babs' defense argued that the prosecution's case had been based on circumstantial evidence and unproven allegations. During the trial, Babs claimed that she had not seen a future with Marcel and only had an intimate relationship with him because of her low self-esteem. She even suggested that Els van Doren's daughter, Carol, might have wanted to harm her mother for being away for the weekend. However, despite her efforts to manipulate the jury and shift blame, the judge's verdict prevailed. On October 20, 2010, Babs had been convicted of murdering her friend Els van Doren and received a 30-year prison sentence. During the trial, Babs, steadfastly maintaining her innocence, had been closely monitored to prevent her from harming herself again. She later filed an appeal claiming that the police had interrogated her without a lawyer. In May 2011, her appeal was dismissed. In June 2022, after serving 12.5 years in prison, Babs was conditionally released after a third appeal and is now free. It is a pity that Els van Doren had suffered a tragic fate and that her family had suffered immense pain when the truth had been revealed. Our sincerest condolences go out to the family and loved ones of Els van Doren, who will be deeply missed.